Come close now, my children of the diaspora. Come gather round this old fire burning low in the shadows of night. Listen well. In the damp quarters of southern plantations, where the whip sang its cursed song and black blood watered white cotton, there lived a woman the white folks couldn't break. They called her Sally of the Lash, the black queen who survived 500 lashes and strangled the overseer with her own chain. Lord have mercy. This ain't no white man's fable, no sir. This is the echo of broken bones, the whisper of spirits still wandering through cotton fields. Sit yourselves down, 'cause today I'm gonna tell you a story that pulses like blood in the veins of those who survived. Now listen here, children, 'cause this tale starts where all our sorrows began, in the belly of them slave ships crossing the Middle Passage back in 1798, when the century still smelled of gunpowder and broken promises. The ship was called Mercy. Ain't that something? Sweet Jesus. They named a floating coffin Mercy while packing African souls like firewood in the hold. Down in that darkness, chained body to body, folks swear you could hear the ancestors weeping from across the ocean, mourning the children being torn from Mother Africa's breast. Sally's mama didn't have no American name yet, just the one her own mama gave her in the old tongue. She was down there in that suffering hell, belly swollen with child. In them days of deep sorrow, pregnant didn't mean nothing to the traders. You was cargo, pure and simple. Strong-backed woman meant good price at auction. Baby in the womb, that's 2 for 1. Lord of glory, the stench in that hold. Human waste mixed with seawater, blood from the whip, vomit from the sick ones, and death. Death had its own smell, thick and sweet like rotten fruit. The ship rocked violent-like, and with every wave, the chains sang their iron song, biting into flesh already raw and infected. Sally's mama, she kept her eyes fixed on a crack in the wood above her head, where a sliver of light came through. That little bit of sun was all she had to remember the world wasn't all darkness. The old ones say she whispered prayers to the Orishas, to Yamaya who rules the ocean, begging for mercy that wouldn't come, not from white men's lips. Disease spread through that hold like wildfire through dry grass. Folks died every night, some from sickness, some from heartbreak so deep it stopped their hearts cold. The sailors, they'd come down at dawn, drag the bodies up and toss them overboard like spoiled meat. Sharks followed that ship all the way across the Atlantic, feasting on African flesh. The ocean drank more blood that day than the earth ever could. But Sally's mama, she was made of iron wrapped in velvet. Powerful, strong, that woman. Even with her belly cramping from lack of food, even with the baby inside her kicking like it knew the world it was coming into wasn't fit for living, she held on with a grip tighter than them chains. There was an elder chained next to her, old wise one, man who'd been a priest back in the homeland. His voice was like dried leaves rustling when he spoke. "The child in your womb," he whispered one night when the sailors was drunk topside, "got the mark of a queen on her spirit. The ancestors told me in a dream, she gonna suffer something terrible, but she gonna rise. You hear me, sister? She gonna rise like the sun after the longest night." Sally's mama touched her belly, felt the baby move and wept. Silent tears, 'cause crying out loud earned you the whip even down in that hole. She knew, Lord, how she knew, that whatever life this child was gonna have, it wouldn't be the one she'd dreamed of back home, running free under African skies. Weeks crawled by like wounded animals. The voyage seemed endless, like God himself had forgotten where the Americas was. Then one morning the ship lurched different. The sailors started shouting, "Land! Virginia coast," they said. The quiet of the quarters at night gave way to chaos. Traders barking orders, chains being unlocked, bodies being dragged topside. The sunlight hit Sally's mama like a fist. Months in darkness made her eyes scream with pain. She stumbled on deck, squinting, and saw it, the shore of a new world built on our backs. The air smelled different here. Pine trees and salt marsh, not the red earth of home. Foreign land, cursed ground. They was herded like cattle down the gangplank, still in chains, still in rags. A crowd of white folks gathered at the dock, buyers, curious onlookers, slave traders with cold eyes assessing flesh like it was horse flesh. Sally's mama felt the baby drop lower in her belly. Labor pains started, sharp and insistent. "This one's breedin'," an overseer called out, pointing at her swollen stomach. "Fresh off the boat and ready to drop. Who wants a 2-for-1? The auction block stood in the center of the dock, worn smooth by countless feet of the sold and broken. They pushed Sally's mama up there, made her turn slow so the buyers could see every angle. Her water broke right there, fluid running down her legs, mixing with the blood from her ankles where the chains had cut deep. The auctioneer, fat man with a face red as raw meat, he didn't even pause. "Strong wench, prime breedin' age, comes with a fresh pickaninny. Who'll start the biddin'?" Hands shot up. Numbers was called out. Sally's mama gripped the edge of the auction block, contraptions ripping through her body. She wanted to scream, but pride, that last bit of dignity them traitors couldn't steal, kept her lips pressed tight. A man stepped forward from the crowd. Elijah Hawthorne, plantation owner from the interior. Tall, thin like a scarecrow with eyes cold as a January frost. He looked at Sally's mama the way a man looks at a good horse, calculating, measuring profit. "Sold," the hammer came down, "to Master Hawthorne for $200. They dragged her off the block, chains still on. Labor pains coming faster now. Hawthorne's overseer, man named Silas Crowe, though Sally's mama didn't know his name yet. He grabbed her arm rough and pulled her toward a wagon. "Move it, wench. Master don't pay for damaged goods." The wagon ride to Hawthorne Plantation was a blur of pain. Every bump in the dirt road sent agony shooting through her body. The other enslaved folks in the wagon, some fresh from Africa like her, some American-born, they made room, tried to help. But what could they do? Ain't no midwife in a slave wagon. Ain't no mercy on a plantation road. Just as the sun was setting, painting the Virginia sky the color of blood and fire, the wagon rolled into Hawthorne Plantation. Fields of tobacco stretched far as the eye could see. The big house sat on a hill, white columns gleaming like teeth. And down below, in the hollow, the slave quarters, rows of wooden cabins, dark and low, like coffins standing on end. They threw Sally's mama into one of them cabins. Dirt floor, no windows, just a hole in the roof for smoke. An old woman, been on the plantation since before memory. She came with hot water and rags. Conjure woman, root doctor, the one enslaved folks turned to when sickness came and white doctors wouldn't touch black flesh. "Push, child," the old woman said. "Push that baby into this wretched world." Sally's mama pushed. Pushed with all the strength she had left after crossing the ocean, after standing on that auction block, after being sold like cattle. She pushed and screamed and prayed to gods who seemed so far away they might as well be dead. And then, Lord have mercy. The baby came, a girl, tiny, perfect, with skin dark as midnight and a cry loud enough to wake the ancestors. The old root doctor held the baby up in the dim light of a tallow candle. "This one here," she said, her voice carrying the weight of prophecy. "This one got fire in her. I seen it before. She gonna burn bright or burn out, but either way she gonna burn." Sally's mama reached for her daughter with trembling hands. Tears cut rivers through the dirt on her face. "Sally," she whispered, naming her child in the language of the masters, 'cause African names got you whipped on Hawthorne Plantation. "Her name's Sally." Outside the cabin they could hear it, the crack of a whip somewhere in the distance, the song of the enslaved folks finishing the day's work, the rattle of chains. This was the world Sally was born into. The old root doctor wrapped the baby in a scrap of cloth and handed her to her mama. "You keep this child close," she said, voice low and urgent. "Teach her everything you remember about home. Teach her the names of the ancestors. Teach her to fight, 'cause life here gonna try to break her every single day." Sally's mama held her baby tight, and in that moment she made a promise sealed in blood and pain and the memory of everything she'd lost. "They can chain my body," she whispered into Sally's tiny ear. "But they ain't never gonna chain your spirit. You hear me, child? You gonna be free one way or another." The baby's first cry echoed through the quarters. The other enslaved folks heard it and knew. Another soul had entered bondage. Another life would be measured in cotton-picked, tobacco-cut, and the master's whims. But what they didn't know, couldn't know, was that this baby, this tiny girl born in darkness and pain, would one day become a legend, would survive 500 lashes, would strangle a white overseer with her own chains, would lead folks to freedom through the Underground Railroad. The night Sally was born, old folks swear the stars burned brighter than usual, like the ancestors was lighting torches to guide a warrior into battle. In the big house, Master Hawthorne sat in his study, counting money and sipping whiskey. He wrote in his ledger, "New purchase, female, with child, girl. Total investment, $200. Expected return, substantial." He didn't know he'd just bought a revolution. And in the quarters, as Sally's mama nursed her newborn daughter, the auctioneer's hammer still echoed in her mind. That hammer coming down was the first sound of Sally's life. But it wouldn't be the last. The plantation bell rang before dawn, same as it done every morning since before memory. That iron tongue calling the enslaved to another day of suffering. Sally's first years passed like water through cupped hands. Precious, brief, already gone before you could hold tight. In them days of deep sorrow, childhood was a luxury black children couldn't afford. By the time Sally could walk steady, her mama had her out in the tobacco fields, little hands learning to pull weeds between the rows. The sun beat down merciless, and the Virginia clay stuck to bare feet like it was trying to claim you for the earth. Sally's mama taught her everything she could remember from across the ocean. At night, in the cabin they shared with 6 other souls, she'd whisper stories in the old tongue, tales of kings and queens, of warriors who never bowed, of gods who walked among the people. Lord of glory. Them stories was dangerous. Master Hawthorne had a rule. Speak in African languages earned you the whip. But in the darkness, with voices low as breath, the old ways stayed alive. "Remember," Sally's mama would say, fingers braiding her daughter's hair in the patterns of their homeland. "You got royal blood in your veins. Don't matter what these white folks call you. Don't matter if they mark you with their iron. You are a queen." Sally grew tall and strong. By 5 years old, she could carry water buckets that made grown women groan. Her eyes, Lord, them eyes, they burned with something the overseer Silas Crowe noticed even then. Defiance. Spirit. Fire that wouldn't be put out easy. The old root doctor who'd delivered Sally, Aunt Hester she was called, she watched the girl close. "That child walking with the ancestors," she told Sally's mama one Sunday, when enslaved folks got a few hours to tend their own small gardens. "I seen it in the way she moves, like she remembering something she ain't even learned yet." Sundays was the only day that felt almost human. The plantation bell stayed quiet till noon. Folks could tend their small plots, grow collard greens and sweet potatoes, maybe catch a rabbit in the woods if the overseer wasn't watching too close. The old ones gathered under a big oak tree, the preacher tree they called it, and sang spirituals that sounded like prayers but was really coded messages. "Wade in the water, children," meant the paddy rollers was out hunting runaways. "Follow the drinking gourd," pointed the way north to freedom. Sally learned these songs young, learned to read the signs that white folks couldn't see, which birds sang when danger was near, which plants Aunt Hester used for healing and which for cursing, how to walk through the quarters without making a sound. But life on Hawthorne Plantation wasn't just learning and surviving. It was witnessing horrors that marked your soul deeper than any iron brand. When Sally was 4, she saw her first sail. A young man, couldn't have been more than 20, tried to run. Made it 3 days into the woods before the dogs caught him. They brought him back in chains, back torn open from the tree branches, feet bloody and swollen. Master Hawthorne, he didn't believe in waste. Instead of killing the man outright, he sold him downriver to the sugar plantations in Louisiana. Everybody knew that was a death sentence, just slower. The man's mama wailed so loud they had to drag her back to the quarters. Her cry cut through the air like a blade, and Sally never forgot it. That sound of a mother losing her child, that was the soundtrack of slavery. When Sally turned 5, came the day she'd been dreading without even knowing why. The day of the branding, Master Hawthorne branded all his property, horses, cattle, and enslaved folks alike. His mark was an H inside a circle, burned into flesh with an iron heated till it glowed orange-red like the devil's eye. Sally's mama tried to prepare her. "It gonna hurt, child," she said the night before, voice breaking. "Gonna hurt worse than anything you felt, but you gonna be strong. You gonna stand tall like the queens I told you about. You hear me?" Sally nodded, but she was just a baby. How could she understand? The branding happened in the yard between the big house and the quarters, where everybody could see. Overseer Crowe set up the brazier early, getting the coals hot while the enslaved folks was still in the fields. By midday, when the sun was highest and cruelest, he called for the children who'd turned 5 that season. There was 3 of them, Sally, a boy named Thomas, and a girl called Bess. They stood in a line, small bodies trembling, while Silas Crowe heated the iron in the coals. Thomas went first. The boy screamed when the iron touched his shoulder, a sound that sent birds flying from the trees. He collapsed, and 2 older enslaved men had to carry him away. Bess was next. She fainted before the iron even touched her skin. Then came Sally. Silas Crowe looked at her with them cold eyes of his. Already, even then, he saw something in her he didn't like. Something that couldn't be broken easy. "This one here," he said to Master Hawthorne, who watched from the porch sipping lemonade. "This one got too much pride." "Then brand her good," Hawthorne replied. "Break it early." They held Sally's arms while Crowe pressed the iron to her left shoulder. The smell hit first, burning flesh, her own flesh. Then the pain. Lord have mercy. Pain like the sun itself had fallen from the sky and landed on her skin. Sally's mama screamed from where they'd made her stand and watch. Screamed like her own body was burning. But Sally, oh, meus filhos. Sally didn't make a sound. Her jaw clenched so tight her baby teeth nearly cracked. Tears ran down her face, but her eyes stayed open, staring straight at Silas Crowe. Even at 5 years old, even with her flesh melting under hot iron, she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of hearing her scream. That silence was louder than any cry could be. Crowe pulled the iron away, and Sally stood there, swaying, but not falling. The mark was perfect, a raised scar that would last her whole life. Property of Elijah Hawthorne. "Stubborn little wench," Crowe muttered, but in his voice was something else. Fear, maybe. Or respect he didn't want to give. Aunt Hester took Sally back to the quarters and treated the burn with a poultice made from herbs and roots. "You done good, child," she whispered, wrapping the wound in clean cloth. "You showed him you got iron in your spine, but that gonna make him watch you closer. Man like Silas Crowe, he don't forget a slave who don't break easy." The years rolled on like a wagon wheel through mud, slow, heavy, inevitable. Sally worked the fields, watched loved ones sold away, learned the rhythms of survival. Her daddy, a strong-backed man named Samuel who'd been sold to Hawthorne same year Sally was born. He taught her in stolen moments between dawn and the breakfast bell. "You smarter than you let on," he told her when she was 8, showing her how to read the stars. "Keep it quiet. White folks scared of smart slaves." But Samuel didn't last long. When Sally was 9, he tried to organize a work slowdown. Nothing violent, just everybody working a little slower to protest the reduced rations Master Hawthorne had imposed. They caught wind of it, and Samuel was sold south before the week was out. Sally watched the wagon take her father away, watched till it disappeared down the road in a cloud of red dust. She didn't cry, couldn't afford to. Tears was a luxury. By 12 years old, Sally was already a woman in the eyes of the plantation. Tall as most of the men, with hands calloused from work and a back straight as a pine tree. She picked cotton faster than anybody, not 'cause she loved the work, but 'cause finishing early meant a few minutes to herself. It was on one of them rare free moments that she saw something that changed her forever. A child, couldn't have been more than 6, was pulling a water bucket across the yard. The bucket was too heavy and the child stumbled, spilling water all over Overseer Crowe's boots. Crowe's face went red. "You clumsy little..." He raised his whip. Sally didn't think, just moved. She stepped between Crowe and the child, taking the blow meant for the little one. The whip cut across her back, splitting her dress and her skin. The pain was sharp and bright, but Sally stood her ground. "He just a baby," she said, voice steady. "Punish me if you want, but leave him be." Silas Crowe stared at her. 12 years old and challenging an overseer. That was unheard of. Dangerous. Could get you killed. But something in Sally's eyes stopped him from striking again. Maybe it was the same fire he'd seen when she was 5, burning brighter now. Maybe it was the way every enslaved person in earshot had stopped working, watching, waiting to see what would happen. "You want the whip?" Crowe said, voice low and deadly. "You got it." He ordered 2 men to tie Sally to the whipping post. Right there, in front of everybody, her mama begged, fell to her knees pleading, but they dragged her away. Sally was tied facing the post, arms stretched above her head. Her dress was torn away from her back, exposing the skin that still carried the brand scar from years before. Silas Crowe gave her 10 lashes, each one a line of fire across her back, each one a lesson she'd never forget. But Sally didn't scream. Not once. She bit down on a piece of leather they'd stuffed in her mouth and took it all in silence. When they cut her down, she could barely stand. Blood ran down her back in rivers. They carried her to the quarters, and Aunt Hester worked through the night to keep infection from setting in. "Lord, child," Aunt Hester whispered, wrapping Sally's torn flesh. "You got courage like I ain't never seen. But courage gonna get you killed if you ain't careful." Sally's mama sat beside her daughter's pallet all night, holding her hand, singing old songs from across the ocean. Songs about warriors who fell in battle, but whose spirits never died. As the dawn light crept through the cabin cracks, Sally opened her eyes. Her back was on fire, but her spirit, that was burning brighter than ever. From his spot in the doorway, Silas Crowe watched the cabin, whip still in his hand. "That one gonna give me trouble," he muttered to himself. And he was right. "Now listen here, children, 'cause time moves different when you're in bondage. Days bleed into weeks, weeks into years. And before you know it, you done lived a whole lifetime between sunrise and the crack of that plantation bell." Sally grew from that defiant child into something else entirely. A woman who carried herself like she remembered kingdoms her eyes had never seen. By the time she reached 16, 17 years of age, folks in the quarters started calling her something special. Not to her face, mind you, 'cause drawing attention was dangerous as playing with fire. But in whispers, in the hush harbors deep in the woods where enslaved folks gathered to pray without white eyes watching, they called her the Queen. Powerful, strong, that's what she was. Tall as any man on the plantation, with shoulders broad from years of hauling cotton sacks and chopping wood. Her hands was hard as iron, but when she touched a sick child's forehead or braided another woman's hair, them same hands was gentle as morning dew on tobacco leaves. Lord of glory. The beauty that girl carried wasn't the soft kind white folks painted in their fancy portraits. No, sir. Sally's beauty was fierce, like a thunderstorm rolling across the Virginia hills. You couldn't look away even when you knew it might strike you down. Her skin was dark as the rich earth that grew Master Hawthorne's tobacco, and her eyes, oh, meus filhos, them eyes held secrets that went back generations, back across the Middle Passage, back to Africa itself. But it was her voice that truly marked her as different. The old ones say that when Sally sang the spirituals, even the mockingbirds stopped their chatter to listen. Her mama had taught her the old songs, the ones from across the ocean, songs in languages the masters couldn't understand. Sally learned quick that music was more than just sound. It was code, it was resistance, it was the voice of a people who refused to be silenced. In them days of deep sorrow, the quarters came alive at night. After the last bell rang and the overseers retired to their cabins with their whiskey and their meanness, the enslaved folks gathered. Sometimes in the praise house, that rickety wooden building Master Hawthorne allowed for Christian instruction, but more often in the deep woods, in clearings known only to those who'd been born into bondage and learned to read the land like a book. These was the hush harbors, secret places where African drums still beat low and steady, where the old religion mixed with the new, where Yemaya and Jesus walked side by side through the prayers of desperate people. Sally became the lead voice in these gatherings. She'd stand in the center of the circle, moonlight catching on her skin like she was carved from ebony, and she'd sing, "Wade in the water." Her voice would rise, clear and strong. "Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water, God's gonna trouble the water." The others would join in, bodies swaying, feet stomping out rhythms that their grandmamas had brought from Africa. The ring shout, they called it. Dancing in a circle, never crossing your feet. Moving counterclockwise like you was turning back time itself. Going back before the chains, before the ships, before the sorrow. But them songs wasn't just for praising. No, child, they was maps, instructions, warnings. When Sally sang "Follow the Drinking Gourd," she was telling folks to look for the Big Dipper, pointing the way north to freedom. When she sang steal away to Jesus," she was letting folks know the Underground Railroad had a conductor coming through, ready to lead the brave ones toward the promised land. Aunt Hester, growing older now but still sharp as a tack, she taught Sally more than just songs. The old root doctor showed her the ways of conjure and root work, how to mix gopher dust to protect against evil, how to make a mojo bag to bring luck or love, how to read signs in nature that white folks was blind to. "You got the gift," Aunt Hester told her one night, pressing a small leather pouch into Sally's palm. "The ancestors chose you for something. I don't know what yet, but they whisper in your name in my dreams." Sally also learned to read, though teaching slaves to read was forbidden on pain of terrible punishment. A traveling preacher, white man with abolitionist leanings who came through once a year to hold revival meetings, he left behind a worn Bible. Sally stole it, hid it under the floorboards of her cabin, and by candlelight, she taught herself letters, then words, then whole passages. She memorized Exodus, the story of Moses leading his people out of bondage. That story became her North Star, and she didn't keep the knowledge to herself. In the darkest hours before dawn, Sally gathered the children and taught them their letters scratched in the dirt with a stick, wiped away before sunrise. "Knowledge is freedom," she whispered to them. "Even if they chain your body, they can't chain your mind unless you let them." It was during these years that love found Sally, though love in slavery was always a dangerous, fragile thing. His name was Isaiah, a young man about her age, born on a neighboring plantation but hired out to Hawthorne for the harvest season. Strong-backed man with a smile that could light up the darkest quarters, Isaiah had hands gentle enough to carve little wooden dolls for the children, and strong enough to haul twice his weight in tobacco. They fell hard and fast, the way young folks do when life is short and uncertain. Stolen moments behind the tobacco barn, hands clasped during the ring shouts, whispered promises under the stars. Isaiah talked about running, about making it to the north, about building a life where their children would be born free. Sally listened and let herself dream just for a little while. "One day," Isaiah would say, pulling her close, "one day we gonna walk in sunlight without fear. We gonna have a piece of land with our name on it. Our real names, not the ones the masters gave us. We gonna be free." Sally wanted to believe him. Lord, how she wanted to believe. But the plantation had ears everywhere, and dreams was dangerous things. It was a Sunday evening, sky painting itself purple and gold when the patty rollers came. Somebody had whispered that Isaiah was planning to run, had been studying the North Star, had been asking too many questions about the roads leading toward Maryland. Whether it was truth or jealous lies didn't matter. Suspicion was enough. They caught Isaiah near the property line, claim he was trying to escape, dragged him back in chains while Sally and the others was forced to watch. Master Hawthorne, he believed in examples, believed that mercy was weakness and fear was the best overseer. "This here's what happens to runaways," Hawthorne announced from his horse, voice cold as January frost. "Or them that even thinks about running." They hanged Isaiah from the old oak tree, the same preacher tree where folks gathered on Sundays to sing and pray. Used it as a gallows. Sally screamed, fought against the hands holding her back, but there was too many. They made everybody watch, even the children, made them see what rebellion cost. Isaiah's last words, choked out as the rope tightened, was directed at Sally. "Be free. for both of us. Then silence. Just the creak of the rope and the weeping of those forced to witness. They left his body hanging there for 3 days as a warning. Buzzards circled overhead. The smell of death settled over the quarters like a blanket nobody could shake off. Sally couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, could barely breathe. The grief was a physical thing pressing down on her chest like a stone. On the 3rd night, they finally cut Isaiah down. The enslaved folks buried him in the far corner of the plantation cemetery, the section reserved for slaves. Unmarked graves, forgotten names. But Sally marked it in her own way. She planted sweetgrass over his grave and carved his true name, the one he'd whispered to her in their most intimate moments, his African name that his grandmother had preserved through the generations, into a smooth river stone that she placed at the head of the plot. At the funeral, such as it was, Sally stood over Isaiah's grave and made a promise. Voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face, she spoke loud enough for the ancestors to hear. They can kill our bodies, but they ain't killed our spirits. They can break our bones, but they ain't broken our will. Isaiah, you restin' now, but I swear on everything holy and unholy. Somebody gonna pay for this. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but justice coming. It's coming sure as the North Star shines. Aunt Hester touched Sally's arm, warning in her eyes. Dangerous words, them. Words that could get you sold or worse. But Sally didn't care no more. Something had hardened inside her, like iron in a forge. The girl who'd taken the whip for a child was gone. The woman who'd loved and lost stood in her place, and that woman was finished bending. From the shadows near the big house, Silas Crowe watched the burial. He'd been overseer for years now, had his eyes on Sally since she was a child, watching her grow into a woman who refused to be invisible. He saw the way other enslaved folks looked at her, with respect, with hope, with something that looked dangerously like devotion. That kind of influence was a threat. That one there, he muttered to himself, hand unconsciously touching the whip at his belt. She gonna need breaking soon, for she gets ideas in other folks' heads. The night after the burial, Sally couldn't stay in her cabin. The walls felt like they was closing in, squeezing the breath from her lungs. She walked out to the edge of the quarters, where the tobacco fields met the tree line, and looked up at the stars. The same stars Isaiah had studied, dreaming of freedom. I ain't forgot, she whispered to the darkness, to the ancestors, to Isaiah's spirit. I ain't forgot, and I ain't forgiven. This world you built on our backs gonna tremble one day, gonna shake till it falls. You watch. A wind stirred the tobacco leaves, sounding almost like voices whisper in agreement. And in the darkness, something ancient and angry was waking up inside Sally's soul. Silas Crowe had no idea what was coming for him. Listen close now, children, 'cause this is where the story gets darker than a moonless night in the bayou. This is where evil stopped wearing a mask and showed its true face. The face of a man named Silas Crowe. Silas wasn't born a monster, the old ones say, but somewhere between Ireland's potato famine and the Virginia plantation fields, he sold whatever piece of soul he might have had. Come to America hungry and desperate, found work as an overseer 'cause white skin was the only qualification needed to wield a whip over black backs. In them days of deep sorrow, plenty of poor whites discovered that the only thing keeping them from the bottom of society's ladder was the enslaved folks they could step on. By the time Sally turned 18, Silas Crowe had risen to head overseer of Hawthorne Plantation. Master Hawthorne, getting older and more interested in his whiskey than his property, left most of the daily running to Crowe. And Lord have mercy, did that man relish the power. Silas was tall and lean, built like a hickory switch, all sinew and meanness. His face was weathered leather, carved with lines of cruelty and marked with scars from tavern fights and worse. But it was his eyes that truly showed what he was, pale blue like winter ice, cold and empty of mercy. He kept his whip, which he called justiceira, Portuguese word he'd learned from a sailor meaning she who brings justice, coiled at his belt like a snake waiting to strike. Now Silas had noticed Sally for years. Couldn't help it. She was like a thorn in his side that he couldn't pluck out, a problem he couldn't solve with his usual methods. Most enslaved folks, they learn to make themselves invisible, to move through the plantation like ghosts, eyes down, voices quiet. But Sally, powerful, strong Sally, she walked like she owned the ground beneath her feet. Her back was straight, her gaze was steady, and worst of all, other slaves followed her lead. After Isaiah's death, Sally's defiance grew sharper. She wasn't loud about it, wasn't foolish, but in small ways, she resisted. Worked just slow enough to not be whipped, but not fast enough to profit Master Hawthorne. Taught the children songs that sounded like spirituals but carried messages of resistance. Looked Silas Crowe dead in the eye when he barked orders, a second too long before complying. That look, Lord of Glory, that look made Silas's blood boil. See, Silas Crowe believed in a natural order. White above black, man above woman, master above slave. And here was Sally, a black woman in chains, looking at him like she could see right through to his rotten core. Like she knew he was nothing but a poor Irish immigrant who'd found his only power in oppressing folks even more desperate than himself. The obsession started slow. At first, it was just professional interest, keeping an eye on a potential troublemaker. But as months passed after Isaiah's hanging, Silas found himself watching Sally more and more. The way she moved through the tobacco fields, strong and graceful despite the brutal labor. The way other slaves gravitated toward her during the few moments of rest. The way she sang spirituals in a voice that seemed to carry the pain and hope of generations. It twisted something in him. Desire mixed with hatred. Lust tangled with the need to dominate and destroy. He wanted to possess her and break her in equal measure. One evening in late summer, when the air was thick as molasses and thunderclouds gathered on the horizon, Silas found Sally alone behind the tobacco barn. She was drawing water from the well, her back to him, humming low one of them old songs. "You there, Sally?" he called out, his voice carrying a tone that made her skin crawl. She turned slow, face carefully neutral. "Yes, sir?" Silas walked closer, too close, invasion written in every step. "You a mighty fine-looking woman," he said, words slurred slightly. Been drinking, she could smell it on him. "Too fine to be wasting yourself on field work." Sally kept her eyes fixed on a point past his shoulder. "I works where Master Hawthorne puts me, sir." "Master Hawthorne don't pay much attention these days." Silas reached out, touched her arm. His hand was hot and clammy. "But I do. I pay close attention to you, Sally." She pulled her arm away, gentle but firm. "I got work to finish 'fore dark, sir." The rejection, even that small, careful rejection, lit something dangerous in Silas's eyes. No good man like him. He wasn't used to black women refusing him anything. On most plantations, overseers took what they wanted from enslaved women, and there wasn't nothing nobody could do about it. It was one of slavery's cruelest truths, a violence that left no visible scars but destroyed souls just the same. "I'm offering you special treatment," Silas said, voice hardening. "You could have easier work, better food, maybe even your own cabin." Sally finally met his eyes, and what he saw there wasn't fear or temptation. It was cold, pure contempt. "I ain't interested in your special treatment, sir." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them, broken only by distant thunder. Then Silas grabbed her wrist, grip bruising. "You forgetting your place, girl." "My place," Sally said, voice steady as stone, "is as a child of God, and God didn't make me to be your plaything." Sweet Jesus. The words hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Silas's face went red, then purple. His free hand moved to the whip at his belt. "You gonna regret them words," he hissed. "Gonna regret 'em something terrible." He released her wrist with a shove that sent her stumbling backward. Sally caught herself, never breaking eye contact. Even now, even facing the devil's rage, she wouldn't bow. "We'll see how proud you are tomorrow," Silas said. "We'll see." He stormed off toward the big house, and Sally knew, Lord, how she knew, that she'd just signed her own death warrant. Or close to it. That night, she tried to prepare. Aunt Hester made her chew willow bark for the pain that was coming, and rubbed her back with a salve that would help the skin heal faster. Sally's mama wept and prayed, calling on the ancestors, on the Orishas, on Jesus and Mary and every saint she could name. "You should have just," her mama started, then stopped. 'Cause what could she say? Submit to rape? Let him violate her body to save her skin? Some prices was too high, even for survival. Sally held her mama's hand. "I'm a queen, remember? You told me that since I was born. Queens don't bow to men like Silas Crowe." The next morning came too soon, dawn breaking over the plantation like a wound. The bell rang, calling enslaved folks to the yard. Unusual. Normally they went straight to the fields, but Master Hawthorne, dragged from his stupor by Silas, stood on the big house porch. The entire enslaved population was assembled. Every man, woman, and child forced to stand in rows. Sally stood tall among them, knowing what was coming, but refusing to show fear. Silas Crowe stepped forward, whip in hand. "This here slave," he announced, voice carrying across the yard. "This Sally, she been insubordinate, refused direct orders, showed disrespect to her betters. Lies, mostly. But truth didn't matter in slavery. Master Hawthorne has authorized appropriate punishment," Silas continued. 50 lashes. A collective gasp went through the assembled slaves. 50 lashes was enough to kill some folks, certainly enough to leave permanent damage. Sally's mama fell to her knees, begging for mercy that wouldn't come. They dragged Sally to the whipping post in the center of the yard. That same post where she'd taken 10 lashes years ago for protecting a child. 2 men tied her wrists above her head, stretching her body taut. They ripped the back of her dress open, exposing skin that still carried scars from previous beatings. Silas walked behind her, whip unfurling like a serpent. "Any last words, Your Highness?" he mocked. Sally turned her head, looked him dead in the eye one more time. "I am a queen," she said loud enough for everybody to hear. "And one day, you gonna pay for every soul you tortured." The first lash fell like lightning, tearing a line of fire across her back. Sally bit down on the leather strap they'd given her, refused to scream. The second lash crossed the first, forming an X of blood. Third, fourth, fifth, Silas put all his rage and frustrated lust into each blow, the whip singing its terrible song. By the 20th lash, Sally's back was raw meat, blood running down her legs, pooling in the dirt. By the 30th, she'd passed into a state beyond pain, somewhere her mind fled to survive. She saw her mama's face from the slave ship, saw Isaiah smiling at her, saw African queens walking across red earth under vast skies. 40, 45. The enslaved folks watching wept openly now. Children hid their faces. Old men muttered prayers. 50. They cut Sally down and she collapsed like a puppet with cut strings, unconscious, bleeding, but alive, barely. They carried her to the quarters, and Aunt Hester went to work with her roots and herbs, knowing this might be beyond even her power to heal. For 3 days, Sally burned with fever, delirious, calling out to the ancestors in languages nobody recognized. Her mama never left her side, bathing her forehead, forcing water and willow bark tea between her lips, praying every prayer she knew. On the 4th day, Sally opened her eyes. The pain was still there, would always be there in some form, but she was alive, powerful, strong, even in brokenness. The enslaved folks, they started calling her something new after that beating. Not just the queen anymore. Now she was Queen Sally of the Scars, woman who took 50 lashes and lived, woman who looked the devil in the face and didn't blink. Silas Crowe had tried to break her. Instead, he'd made her a legend. But he wasn't finished. And neither was Sally. Now you listen good, children, 'cause this part of the story gonna hurt your heart. But we gotta tell it true. Gotta remember even the painful parts, 'cause that's how we honor them that came before. After them 50 lashes, Sally took months to heal proper. Her back was a map of scars, raised ridges that told the story of Silas Crowe's cruelty. But scars on the outside ain't nothing compared to what slavery did to the inside of a person. Sally was changed, yes sir, harder, colder, like steel that's been through the fire and come out stronger but less forgiving. The girl who used to sing with joy in the hush harbors now sang with rage barely contained. The woman who used to dream of freedom now plotted revenge with the patience of someone who knows waiting is part of warfare. But life on a plantation don't stop for nobody's pain. The tobacco still needed harvesting. The master still needed profit. And time, Lord of glory. Time just kept rolling on like the James River, slow and inevitable. It was during this hard season that Jacob came into Sally's life. Jacob was a strong-backed man from a plantation 20 miles south, hired out by his master during harvest time when Hawthorne needed extra hands. He was quiet, thoughtful, with hands scarred from years of blacksmith work, and eyes that held kindness even after everything slavery had tried to burn out of him. Where Isaiah had been fire and dreams, Jacob was earth and steady strength. He saw Sally one evening by the well, drawing water as the sun painted the sky red like blood. Saw them scars on her back where her dress had shifted. Saw the way she moved careful like, still hurtin' months later. Most men would have looked away, scared of a woman who carried that much pain and defiance. But Jacob, he saw a warrior. "Evening, sister," he said, voice gentle as summer rain. Sally looked up, wary. Trust didn't come easy no more. "Evening." "Name's Jacob. Working the harvest this season." "Sally, I know who you are," Jacob said, and there was respect in his voice. "Everybody knows Queen Sally, woman who took 50 lashes and didn't break." Something in Sally's chest cracked just a little. Not broke, but maybe thawed. "I ain't no queen, just a woman trying to survive." "Surviving like you do," Jacob replied. "That's royalty enough." They talked that evening, just small words at first, then more evenings followed. Jacob would find reasons to be near the well at sunset. Sally would find reasons to need water at that particular time. Slowly, like plants pushing through hard soil, something grew between them. Jacob didn't push, didn't demand. He just was there, steady and solid. He told her about his mama, sold away when he was young, about the African stories his grandmother had whispered to him before she died, about the small freedoms he'd carved out in the forge where his master let him work with some independence. "I make chains during the day," he told her one night, shame thick in his voice. "Chains for cotton bales, chains for gates, chains for us. Hate it, but it's my skill, my value to the master. Ain't your fault what they make you do," Sally said, understanding the weight of forced complicity. "Still feels like betrayal," Jacob admitted. "Every link I forge." Sally touched his hand, first time she'd touched a man gentle-like since Isaiah died. "You survive however you can. Ain't no shame in that." Their courtship, if you could call it that, was stolen moments and whispered words. In slavery, love was an act of rebellion, a refusal to let the masters control everything, including your heart. They married in secret, in the hush harbor deep in the woods, with Aunt Hester speaking the words over them. No white preacher, no master's permission, just promises made before God and the ancestors. "I can't promise you happiness," Jacob said, holding both her hands. "Can't promise you comfort or safety. All I can promise is I'll stand beside you long as I draw breath." "That's more than most get," Sally replied. "I take it, I take you." They jumped the broom that night, old African tradition, leaping over a broom handle together to symbolize crossing into a new life. The enslaved folks who witnessed it sang soft spirituals, joy mixed with the ever-present knowledge that white folks could tear this union apart any time they pleased. For a while, blessed, brief while, Sally knew something like peace. Jacob's master agreed to hire him out to Hawthorne Plantation permanent-like. Needed the money more than the blacksmith. They was given permission to share a cabin, small mercy that felt like a miracle. And then Sally discovered she was carrying a child. Lord have mercy. The fear that gripped her heart when she realized was worse than any whipping. Bringing a child into slavery, knowing that baby would be property before it drew its first breath, knowing it could be sold away any time. That knowledge was a weight that nearly crushed her. Jacob found her crying behind their cabin one evening, something he'd never seen her do, not even after the 50 lashes. "What's wrong?" He knelt beside her, fear in his own eyes. "I'm with child," Sally whispered. The emotions that crossed Jacob's face, joy, terror, sorrow, hope, despair, all of them at once. He pulled her close. "We gonna protect this baby," he said, voice fierce. "Somehow we gonna protect our child." 9 months later, on a cold February night when frost painted the windows of the slave quarters, Sally gave birth to a son. The pain of childbirth was different from the pain of the whip, but in slavery, both brought new life into suffering. Aunt Hester delivered the baby, same as she'd delivered Sally herself years before. "It's a boy," she announced, holding up the squalling infant. "Strong lungs on this one." Sally took her son in her arms, and despite everything, despite the chains, despite the scars, despite the knowledge that this child would grow up in bondage, she felt love so fierce it was like fire in her chest. "Elijah," she said, naming him. Ironic, bitter naming. Same name as the master who owned them all. But also the name of the prophet who called down fire from heaven. "You gonna be a prophet too," she whispered to her baby. "Gonna prophesy freedom." Jacob wept when he held his son, big calloused hands so gentle with the tiny body. "He got your eyes," he said to Sally. "Powerful, strong eyes." For 2 years they lived in that small cabin, a family carved out of oppression. Elijah grew fast, bright and curious, learning to walk and talk earlier than most babies. Sally sang him the old songs, taught him his numbers in secret, told him stories about African kings even though he was too young to understand. Then Sally got pregnant again. Another son, born in the heat of summer, named Moses. Another prophet, another rebellion wrapped in baby clothes. 2 boys, Aunt Hester said, looking at the children with eyes that saw too much. 2 boys who gonna either die young or change the world. Ain't no middle ground for children born with that kind of fire in their blood. Sally's mama, growing old now, spent hours with her grandsons, teaching them the few African words she remembered, showing them how to braid sweetgrass the old way. They need to know where they come from, she told Sally, even if they can't never go back. Those years with Jacob and the boys, Lord of Glory, they was the closest Sally ever came to happiness in bondage. Yes, the work was still brutal. Yes, Silas Crowe still watched her with eyes full of hate and thwarted lust. Yes, the whip still sang its song over other backs. But in the evenings, in their small cabin with her husband and her sons, Sally could almost forget. Almost. Jacob made little wooden toys for the boys when he could steal moments in the blacksmith shop. Carved horses and birds, figures of men standing tall and free. Moses, even at 2 years old, loved them horses, would gallop them through the dirt floor of the cabin making clip-clop sounds. Elijah, 4 now and sharp as a tack, he asked questions that broke Sally's heart. "Mama, why we live here and white folks live there?" Pointing at the big house. "Why Papa gotta work all day and can't play? Why that man hit Uncle Thomas with the whip?" How you answer them questions. How you explain to a child that the world is built on injustice and their very existence is considered property. Sally did her best, told him stories about Moses in Egypt, about how God freed the Israelites, about how someday their people would be free too. "When, Mama?" Elijah would ask, eyes wide and trusting. "Soon, baby, soon." But soon wasn't coming fast enough. Master Hawthorne was getting deeper in debt. The tobacco prices was falling, and he'd made bad investments in some railroad scheme that collapsed. Word spread through the quarters that he might have to sell some of his property to pay creditors. Property, that's what they was. Sally, Jacob, their babies, Aunt Hester, Sally's mama, all of them. Just property that could be liquidated like furniture or livestock. The fear was a living thing in the quarters. Who would be sold? Where would they go? Would families be kept together? Jacob tried to stay positive. "Master Hawthorne ain't never split families before," he said. "He got some decency." But Sally knew better. She'd seen too much. "When white men need money," she told Jacob, "decency is the first thing they sell." She was right. One morning, Silas Crowe came to their cabin. The look on his face wasn't cruel triumph this time. It was almost apologetic, which made it worse somehow. "Jacob," he said, not meeting nobody's eyes, "Master needs you back at your old plantation. Your master calling in the hire contract." Jacob's face went gray. "But my family ain't my decision," Silas said, and for once he wasn't lying. "You got till Sunday to get your things." 3 days. They had 3 days before Jacob would be taken away. 20 miles might as well be 1,000 when you got no rights. No way to travel. No power to stay together. Those 3 days passed like water through cupped hands. Sally held Jacob at night, both of them pretending to sleep, while actually just memorizing the feeling of being together. Jacob carved one last toy for each boy. A bird for Elijah, a horse for Moses. "So you remember Papa," he whispered. Sunday came too soon, like Judgment Day always does. They let Sally and the boys walk Jacob to the wagon that would take him away. Elijah cried, holding his papa's leg. Moses was too young to understand why Mama was shaking. "I'll find a way back," Jacob promised, though both he and Sally knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. "I'll find a way. Take care of our boys," he said to Sally, voice breaking. "Raise them strong." "I will," Sally swore. "I swear it on everything holy." The wagon pulled away. Jacob looked back until he couldn't see them no more. Sally stood there, a son on each hip, watching her husband disappear into the distance like smoke. That night, alone in the cabin with her boys, Sally didn't cry. Couldn't afford to. Had to be strong for Elijah and Moses, but Silas Crowe, watching from the shadows near the big house, he smiled. 1 down. 2 more to go. Listen here now, 'cause this is where the devil stopped dancing around and showed his full hand. This is where Silas Crowe's hatred finally found the courage to speak its name out loud. After Jacob was taken away, Sally threw herself into her children like a drowning woman grabbing onto driftwood. Elijah and Moses was all she had left of love, all she had left of hope. The boys grew despite the hardship. Elijah, now 5 years old, was sharp as a whip and twice as quick. The child could count to 100, could recognize letters scratched in the dirt, could remember every story Sally told him word for word. Lord of glory. That boy had his mama's fire and his papa's steady intelligence. Moses, 3 years old, was quieter, but just as strong-willed, with a smile that could light up the darkest quarters and a stubborn streak that reminded Sally of herself as a child. Sally worked harder than ever, trying to prove her value so Master Hawthorne wouldn't sell her or the boys. She was in the fields before dawn, back bent over tobacco plants till her spine screamed. She took on extra work washing clothes for the big house, mending sacks, anything to make herself indispensable. At night, exhausted beyond measure, she still found time to teach her boys, to sing them the spirituals, to tell them about their papa who loved them even though he couldn't be there. "Where, Papa?" Moses would ask every night, his small voice breaking Sally's heart fresh each time. "Papa working far away," Sally would answer, pulling him close. "But he thinking about you every single day. He love you bigger than the sky." In them days of deep sorrow, Sally tried to make herself invisible to Silas Crowe. Kept her eyes down when he passed, answered yes sir and no sir, without that edge of defiance that used to mark her voice. She thought maybe if she was quiet enough, humble enough, he'd leave her alone. Let her raise her boys in whatever peace slavery allowed. But a man like Silas Crowe, he don't forget. And he sure don't forgive. See, Sally's very existence was an insult to him. Every time he saw her walking tall despite them scars on her back, every time he heard her singing in the quarters, every time other enslaved folks looked to her for strength, it reminded him that he'd failed to break her, failed with the whip, failed with cruelty, failed with everything he'd thrown at her. And failure to a man whose only power came from making others suffer was worse than death. 2 years had passed since Jacob left. 2 years of Sally keeping her head down, working till her hands bled, loving her boys with a fierceness that scared even her. Spring had come to Virginia, painting the plantation in colors that mocked the grayness of enslaved life. It It was on a Saturday evening after the week's work was done and enslaved folks had a few hours to themselves that Silas made his move. Sally was behind her cabin, washing clothes in a wooden tub, scrubbing fabric against a washboard, while Elijah and Moses played nearby with sticks and stones, making up games from nothing like children do. The sun was setting, painting everything gold, and for just a moment, Sally let herself feel something like contentment. That's when Silas Crowe appeared around the corner of the cabin. Sally's hands stilled in the wash water, every muscle in her body tensed. Elijah, sensitive to his mama's moods, stopped playing and moved closer to her. "Evening, Sally," Silas said, voice carrying that false friendliness that was worse than outright cruelty. "Evening, sir," Sally replied, eyes fixed on the washing. "Been watching you," Silas continued, moving closer. "You've been working real hard, real obedient-like." He said the word obedient like it tasted sweet on his tongue. "Just doing my work, sir." "That's good. That's real good." He was close now, too close. Sally could smell the whiskey on his breath, the tobacco smoke in his clothes. "Been thinking maybe you earned yourself some special consideration." Here it was again. The same offer he'd made years ago, before the 50 lashes. The same twisted desire wrapped up in the language of mercy. "I don't need no special consideration, sir," Sally said, voice carefully neutral. "Just need to finish my washing." Silas's hand shot out, gripped her wrist. "I ain't asking, Sally. I'm telling." Sweet Jesus, the rage that flooded through Sally in that moment was like fire in her veins. But she had her boys to think about. Had to be careful, had to be smart. "Let me go, sir," she said, voice low but steady. "Or what?" Silas laughed, ugly sound like a crow cawing. "What you gonna do? You gonna take another 50 lashes? Or maybe you want worse?" His eyes cut to Elijah and Moses standing frozen near the cabin wall. "Maybe your boys need to learn some lessons in obedience too." That threat, Lord have mercy. That threat was the match that lit the powder keg. Something ancient and terrible woke up in Sally's chest. Something that remembered African queens who went to war, remembered Harriet Tubman carrying a pistol on the Underground Railroad, remembered Denmark Vesey planning rebellion, remembered Nat Turner seeing visions of blood and retribution. Sally yanked her wrist free with strength that surprised even her, stood up from the wash tub, water dripping from her hands, and faced Silas Crowe at full height. She was taller than him by an inch, broader in the shoulders from years of hard labor, and in that moment, every bit the queen her mama had always said she was. "You ain't touching me," Sally said, voice like iron. "And you sure ain't touching my children." Silas's face went red, then purple. His hand moved to the whip at his belt, his precious Justicera that he loved more than any living thing. "You forgetting yourself, wench. Forgetting what you are." "I know exactly what I am," Sally replied. Powerful, strong now, fear burned away by righteous fury. "I'm a woman made in God's image. I'm a mother. I'm a child of Africa. And I ain't your property to violate whenever you get drunk and lonely." The words hung in the air like thunder before lightning strikes. Elijah whimpered. Moses started crying. They'd never heard their mama talk to a white man like this. Nobody had. Other enslaved folks, hearing the commotion, started gathering at a distance. Not close enough to be accused of participating, but close enough to witness, to remember. Silas's hand trembled on his whip. "You just signed your death warrant," he said, voice shaking with rage. "You and them bastard children of yours." "They ain't bastards," Sally shot back. "They got a father who married me proper. More than you can say, living alone with nothing but your whip for company." That did it. Silas Crowe lost whatever thin veneer of control he'd been maintaining. He turned on his heel and marched toward the big house, shouting for Master Hawthorne. Sally stood there, water still dripping from her hands, her boys clinging to her skirts, and knew she'd just done something that couldn't be undone. The enslaved folks who'd witnessed it melted back into the shadows, scared of being associated with her rebellion, but also, she could see it in their eyes, awed by it. Aunt Hester appeared at Sally's elbow, moving fast for an old woman. "Child, what have you done?" she whispered, fear and pride mixing in her voice. What I had to do, Sally replied. What I should have done years ago. They gonna kill you for this, you know that. Maybe. Sally picked up Moses, held him close. Elijah pressed against her leg. But I ain't dying on my knees. If death coming, it gonna find me standing tall. Within the hour, Master Hawthorne emerged from the big house, Silas Crowe beside him, both men's faces set in grim determination. The plantation bell rang, not the work bell, but the alarm bell that summoned everyone for an announcement. Enslaved folks gathered in the yard, fear thick in the air. Everybody knew something terrible was coming. You could feel it like thunder in the distance. Master Hawthorne stood on his porch, whiskey glass in hand, looking down at his property with eyes that held no more feeling than if he was looking at cattle. The slave known as Sally, he announced, voice carrying across the silent yard, has committed gross insubordination and assault against Overseer Crowe. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Assault? Nobody had seen Sally touch Silas except to pull her wrist free. She has shown herself to be incorrigible, rebellious, and a danger to the good order of this plantation, Hawthorne continued. Therefore, she will receive maximum punishment as an example to others who might harbor similar defiant thoughts. Silas Crowe stepped forward, that whip uncoiled in his hand like a serpent ready to strike. 500 lashes, he announced, and gasps echoed through the assembled slaves. To be administered at dawn tomorrow. 500. Lord of glory. Nobody survived 500 lashes. That wasn't punishment. That was execution, just drawn out and made into spectacle. Sally's mama fell to her knees, wailing. Other women wept. The men stood silent, fists clenched, helpless rage burning in their eyes. Sally stood still, holding her boys close. 500 lashes. They meant to kill her slow, make her death a warning to everyone else. Fine, let them try. But Silas wasn't finished. He walked down from the porch, stood directly in front of Sally, and smiled. It was the cruelest smile she'd ever seen, worse than any whip. Your boys, he said soft enough that only Sally and those closest could hear. After you dead, they going on the auction block. Gonna sell 'em separate. Make sure they never see each other again. That's what happens to the children of rebels. No good man. Evil-hearted devil. Sally wanted to tear his throat out with her bare hands, wanted to call down the ancestors' fury, wanted to scream till the sky split open. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not with her boys right there, already terrified. Instead, she looked Silas Crowe dead in the eye and said, "You gonna regret this. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But justice coming for you, Silas Crowe. Coming sure as the North Star shines." They dragged her away then, pulled her toward the quarters where she'd spend the night under guard. Elijah and Moses screamed for their mama, reaching out with little hands that couldn't bridge the distance. "Be strong," Sally called to them as they dragged her away. "Remember everything I taught you. Remember who you are." The last thing she saw before they threw her in the locked cabin was her boys' faces, wet with tears, and Silas Crowe standing over them, that terrible smile still on his lips. That night, alone in the dark, Sally didn't pray for mercy, didn't beg God to save her. Instead, she prayed for strength, strength to survive what was coming, strength to see her boys one more time, strength to make Silas Crowe pay for every soul he'd tortured. The ancestors whispered in the darkness. The Orishas gathered close. And somewhere deep in Sally's chest, something that had been waiting for years finally awakened fully. Tomorrow at dawn, they would try to break her with 500 lashes. But Queen Sally of the Scars had already decided. She would survive. No matter what it cost. Now steel yourself, children. Because what I'm about to tell you is gonna tear at your soul. This is the part where hell opened up its mouth and tried to swallow Sally whole. This is the part where flesh was torn and blood ran like rivers, where the very earth cried out against the wickedness of men. But this is also the part where a woman became legend, where human spirit proved stronger than iron and leather. where the ancestors walked among the living. Dawn broke over Hawthorne Plantation like a wound in the sky, all red and bleeding. The plantation bell rang early, calling every enslaved soul to witness what Master Hawthorne and Silas Crowe had planned. Wasn't optional. This was mandatory viewing, a lesson written in blood and pain. They dragged Sally from the locked cabin where she'd spent the night. She hadn't slept, hadn't cried, hadn't begged. Instead, she'd spent them dark hours in something like prayer, calling on every spirit she knew. Her mama's African gods, the Christian God who freed the Israelites, the ancestors who'd survived the Middle Passage, Harriet Tubman who was still out there leading folks to freedom, Nat Turner who'd dared to raise his hand against oppression. "If I'm gonna die today," she'd whispered into the darkness, "let me die like a queen. Let my death mean something. Let these children see that we ain't broken. Can't never be fully broken. Not in our souls." The whipping post stood in the center of the yard, that same cursed pole that had tasted so much black blood over the years. The wood was dark with old stains, marked with scratches from fingernails of those who'd been tied there before. Around it, enslaved folks gathered in a semicircle, men, women, children, all forced to watch. The old ones remembered other mass whippings, other examples made of the defiant. The young ones was about to learn what rebellion cost in slavery times. Sally's boys was held back by her mama, both of them crying, reaching for their mother. Elijah kept screaming, "Mama, Mama," till his voice went hoarse. Moses buried his face in his grandmother's skirts, unable to watch. Lord have mercy on them babies, having to witness their mama's torture. They bound Sally to the post, arms stretched high above her head, wrists tied with rope so tight it cut off circulation. Her back was stripped bare, exposing the scars from previous beatings. The 50 lashes from years ago had left their mark, raised ridges of tissue that told their own story of survival. Master Hawthorne sat in a chair they'd brought from the big house, comfortable-like, as if he was watching a theatrical performance instead of ordering a woman beaten to death. He held a ledger ready to keep count. Silas Crowe stood behind Sally, his whip, that devil's tool he called Justice Sarah, uncoiled and ready. The leather was braided tight with small pieces of metal worked into the end to maximize damage. This wasn't no ordinary whip. This was an instrument of destruction. 500 lashes, Silas announced, voice carrying across the silent yard. Count will be kept. Any slave who looks away or closes their eyes will receive 20 lashes themselves. Cruel, making everybody witness, forcing them to participate in Sally's torture by watching. That was the evil genius of slavery. It made victims complicit in their own oppression. Aunt Hester stood near the front, tears streaming down her ancient face, lips moving in silent prayer. She'd prepared Sally as best she could the night before, given her roots to chew that might dull the pain, rubbed salve on her back that might help healing if, when, she survived. But 500 lashes wasn't meant to be survived. This was murder dressed up as discipline. "Begin," Master Hawthorne ordered. The first lash fell. The crack of leather against flesh echoed like a gunshot. Sally's body jerked forward against the post, every muscle going rigid. The pain was immediate, white-hot, a line of fire across her shoulders. But she didn't scream. Bit down on the leather strap they'd given her, jaw clenched so tight her teeth might break. 1, Master Hawthorne marked in his ledger. The second lash crossed the first, making an X of blood. Sally's breath came in harsh gasps, but still no scream. 2, 3rd, 4th, 5th. Silas put all his strength behind each blow, all his rage at being defied, all his twisted need to break this woman who'd refused him. The whip sang its terrible song, leather cutting through skin, digging into muscle, drawing blood that ran down Sally's back in rivers. 10. The enslaved folks watching couldn't hold back their tears no more. Women sobbed openly. Men stood with fists clenched, helpless fury burning in their eyes. Children hid their faces against their parents, but Silas's threat kept the adults watching, bearing witness to atrocity. 25. Sally's back was raw meat now, skin hanging in strips. The pain had gone beyond describable, beyond anything the human mind was meant to endure. She felt herself starting to float away, consciousness trying to flee from the body being destroyed. But something, the ancestors, her own iron will, the spirits of every enslaved person who'd ever resisted, kept her tethered. In her mind, she saw her mama on the slave ship, surviving the Middle Passage pregnant and alone. If she could survive that, Sally thought through the agony, I can survive this. 50. Her vision was blurring now, the world narrowing to nothing but pain and the desperate need to breathe, to stay conscious, to not give Silas the satisfaction of breaking her completely. She thought of her boys, of Elijah's bright eyes and Moses' sweet smile. Stay alive for them, stay alive. 75. Time lost meaning. There was only the rhythm of the whip, the Countmaster Hawthorne called out in his bored voice, the sound of her own blood dripping onto the hard-packed earth. Sally's mind began to wander, seeking escape in memory and vision. She saw Africa, the homeland she'd never known but that lived in her blood, saw red earth and baobab trees, saw kings and queens walking proud under vast skies, saw her ancestors before the ships came, before the chains, when black skin was just skin, not property or commodity. 100. She saw Isaiah, her first love, smiling at her from beyond the grave. Saw him standing under the preacher tree, but this time he wasn't hanging. He was free, whole, beckoning her towards something she couldn't quite see. 125. She saw Jacob, her husband, taken from her, working in a blacksmith shop somewhere far away, thinking of her and their boys. Saw the toys he'd carved, the bird and the horse, saw them as symbols of flight and strength. 150. The pain had transcended physical now. It was spiritual, existential, the very fabric of her being torn apart stitch by stitch. But somewhere deep in the core of herself, where the ancestors lived, where the Orishas dwelt, Sally held on. 200. Murmurs rippled through the watching crowd. 200 lashes, and she was still conscious, still alive. Some folks started to whisper that this was supernatural, that Sally had protection from powers beyond the mortal world. Silas Crowe's arm was tiring, but rage kept him going. Every blow that didn't kill her, every second she stayed conscious was a defeat for him. He struck harder, meaner, trying to break what couldn't be broken. 250. Halfway. Sally's back was nothing but pulp now, bone showing through in places. The blood had soaked through her skirt, pooled at her feet, turned the earth to mud. She should be dead. By every law of nature and medicine, she should be dead. But she wasn't. 300. Aunt Hester's prayers grew louder, mixing with the prayers of others who'd stopped caring if Silas heard them. They prayed in English and African languages, called on Jesus and Ocean and Yamaya, asked for mercy from a God who seemed absent but maybe was listening. 350. Sally's consciousness was flickering like a candle in wind. She'd pass out for seconds at a time, then slam back into awareness with the next lash. Her mind showed her strange visions now. She saw herself standing in a river, washing blood from her hands. Saw herself leading children through a dark forest toward a distant light. Saw herself old, free, surrounded by grandchildren, telling this very story. 400. Lord of Glory. The fact that she was still breathing was a miracle that even Master Hawthorne recognized. He'd stopped calling the Count with boredom and now watched with something like awe. This wasn't natural. This was something else. Silas was soaked with sweat, his arm shaking from exhaustion. The whip was slippery with Sally's blood. But he couldn't stop now, couldn't show weakness in front of all these witnesses. 450. Only 50 more. Sally clung to consciousness by the thinnest thread. She thought of her boys one more time, pictured their faces, and made them a promise in her heart. I will survive this. I will live. I will see you grow up free. 475. The watching crowd had gone silent now, struck dumb by what they was witnessing. This wasn't just a beating anymore. This was testimony. This was prophecy. This was proof that the human spirit could endure anything. 490. 10 more. Sally's lips moved, forming words nobody could hear. She was singing, soft as breath, one of the old spirituals. Soon I will be done with the troubles of the world, going home to live with God. 495. 5 more lashes. Silas raised the whip, his face twisted with exhaustion and fury. The crowd held its breath. 496, 497, 498, 499. One more, just one more, and this torture would end one way or another. Silas drew back for the final blow, put everything he had left into it. The whip fell for the 500th time, cutting across Sally's destroyed back with a sound like thunder. 500. Silence fell like a shroud. Sally hung from the post, body limp, blood covering her from shoulders to feet. Nobody could tell if she was breathing. Then, Lord have mercy, her head lifted, just barely, just enough. Her eyes opened, found Silas Crowe, and in them burned a fire that even 500 lashes couldn't extinguish. She was alive. Broken in body, perhaps. But not in spirit. Never in spirit. Listen close now, children, 'cause this is where death and life walked hand in hand, where the veil between this world and the next grew thin as morning mist. After they cut Sally down from that whipping post, after 500 lashes had turned her back into something that didn't look human no more, they carried her to the quarters like she was already a corpse. And maybe she was, in a way. Maybe the Sally who'd been tied to that post died there, and what survived was something else entirely. Something forged in pain and baptized in blood. They laid her face down on a pallet in the cabin she'd shared with Jacob and the boys. The old women cleared the space, sent the children away, even Elijah and Moses, though they fought and screamed to stay with their mama. Sally's own mama wanted to tend her daughter, but Aunt Hester, voice gentle but firm, said no. "You too close to this, sister," the old root doctor said. "Your hand's gonna shake, your heart gonna break, and we can't afford neither. This girl needs healing, not grief. Let me work." So Sally's mama took the boys outside, held them while they wept, told them their mama was strong, was a fighter, would come back to them. But her own heart was heavy with doubt. Nobody survived 500 lashes. Nobody. Inside the cabin, Aunt Hester went to work with the focused intensity of someone who'd seen too much death to accept it easily. She'd delivered Sally into this world, had watched her grow from baby to woman, to legend. She wasn't about to let her slip away now. First, the old woman examined the damage with hands steady from years of healing the unhealable. Lord of glory. What she saw would have made a weaker person faint. Sally's back was destroyed. Skin torn away in strips, muscle exposed, bone visible in places. The blood had soaked through everything, turned the palate dark and wet. The whip had cut so deep in some places that Aunt Hester could see the girl's ribs through the torn flesh. "Sweet Jesus," she whispered, not in vain but in genuine prayer. "You gonna have to help me with this one." She started with water. Clean water drawn from the well, boiled over a fire with specific herbs. Yarrow to stop bleeding, comfrey for bone and tissue, plantain for infection, willow bark for pain. She let it cool just enough, then began the delicate work of washing Sally's wounds. Sally was unconscious, had been since they cut her down. Her breathing was shallow, irregular, like her body couldn't decide if it wanted to keep going or give up. Every few minutes, Aunt Hester would check the pulse at her throat, weak but steady, stubborn even in extremis. "That's it, child," Aunt Hester murmured as she worked. "You keep breathing, keep fighting. The ancestors ain't ready for you yet." The washing took hours. Each touch, no matter how gentle, made Sally's body twitch and spasm even in unconsciousness. The water in the basin turned red, then redder, had to be changed 3 times before the wounds was clean enough to treat properly. Next came the poultices. Aunt Hester had been preparing for this moment since she heard about the 500 lashes, knew that if Sally survived, and it was a big if, she'd need serious medicine. The old woman had gathered her supplies in secret: spider webs to stop bleeding and promote healing, honey to prevent infection, tobacco leaves crushed and mixed with lard for inflammation, molasses to draw out poison, and her most powerful ingredient, a paste made from roots she'd brought from Africa herself, preserved all these years, used only in the direst circumstances. She spread the mixture across Sally's ravaged back, with hands that had healed hundreds of enslaved folks over the decades. Powerful, strong medicine, old as the homeland, passed down from root doctor to root doctor through generations. The paste burned. She could tell, even though Sally was unconscious, could see the way the girl's muscles tensed. But it would work. Had to work. Then she covered everything with clean cloths torn from an old sheet, wrapping Sally's entire torso like a burial shroud. The girl looked like the walking dead, like something already halfway to the grave. But she was breathing, still breathing. "Now comes the hard part," Aunt Hester said to the empty cabin. "The fever." She'd seen it before with serious whippings. The body would go into shock, try to heal itself. But the trauma was too much. Infection would set in despite the best remedies, and fever would follow, burning the victim up from inside until they either broke the fever or died from it. Sally's fever started that first night, came on like a wildfire. Her skin went hot as coals, sweat pouring off her despite the chills that made her shake. She started talking in her delirium, speaking in languages nobody understood. African tongues her mama had taught her, mixed with English, mixed with something older and stranger that might have been the language of spirits. Aunt Hester sat vigil all night, bathing Sally's forehead with cool water, forcing willow bark tea between her lips when she could, praying in the old ways and the new. Other women from the quarters came to help, taking shifts, singing spirituals low and soft, calling Sally back from whatever dark place she was wandering. Sally's mama brought Elijah and Moses to see their mother once each day, just for a few minutes. The boys would stand at the edge of the pallet, holding hands, staring at the bandaged form that used to dance with them and sing them songs. "Is Mama gonna die?" Elijah asked on the third day, voice small and scared. "No, baby," Sally's mama lied or prayed or hoped. "Your mama too strong to die, she a queen, remember?" But privately, as days passed and the fever didn't break, even Aunt Hester started to lose hope. She'd done everything she knew, used every remedy in her vast knowledge, but Sally was getting worse, not better. The girl burned with such heat you could feel it from across the room. Her breathing grew more labored, more ragged. On the fifth night, Aunt Hester sat alone with Sally, having sent the others away. She held the young woman's hand, one of the few parts of her body not destroyed by the whip, and spoke truth. "I done all I can, child," she said. "Rest is up to you and the spirits. You got to decide if you staying or going. And I'll tell you true, going might be easier. Going might be mercy. You've been through so much suffering, carried so much pain. Wouldn't nobody blame you for letting go, for finding peace on the other side." Sally's eyes moved beneath closed lids, like she was listening. "But," Aunt Hester continued, squeezing the hot hand gently, "if you stay, if you fight through this fever and live, child, you gonna be something powerful. You already a legend, but you come back from this. You gonna be proof that we can't be killed, can't be destroyed, no matter what they do to us. You gonna be hope walking on two legs." That night, something shifted. Sally's fever spiked higher than ever, so high Aunt Hester was sure the girl would die before dawn. But instead of burning her up, the fever seemed to burn something away, some final barrier between this world and the next. Sally began to have visions. She saw the middle passage, saw her mama in the belly of the slave ship, saw the hundreds who'd died crossing the ocean and been thrown to the sharks, saw their spirits rising from the water, forming a bridge across the Atlantic that glowed with ancestral light. She saw African queens, Nzinga of Ndongo, Ya Asantewa of the Ashanti, Nanny of the Maroons, all of them standing in a circle around her pallet. their presence so real. Aunt Hester later swore the cabin filled with the scent of African flowers that didn't grow in Virginia. She saw the future, or possible futures, saw her boys grown and free, saw herself old and telling stories to grandchildren who'd never known chains, saw the end of slavery though she didn't know how or when it would come. And she saw Silas Crowe, saw him clear as day, saw the moment of his death, saw her own hands wrapped around his throat in chains that became serpents, became justice, became retribution. Not yet, a voice told her mama's voice from the slave ship, or maybe her own voice from the future, or maybe the voice of Africa itself. Not your time to cross over. Too much work left undone. Too many souls depending on you. Go back, daughter. Go back and fight. The fever broke just before dawn on the 6th day. Aunt Hester, dozing in her chair, jerked awake at the sudden change in the cabin's atmosphere. The air felt different, lighter somehow. She rushed to Sally's side and placed a hand on her forehead. Cool. The skin was cool and dry, the fever gone like it had never been. Lord of glory, Aunt Hester breathed. She'd done it. She actually done it. Sally's eyes opened for the first time in 6 days. They was different now. Darker, deeper, like she'd seen things beyond the veil and brought some of that knowledge back with her. She tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. Aunt Hester lifted Sally's head gentle-like and gave her water. Just sips at first. Sally drank like someone dying of thirst, and maybe she had been. My boys, Sally croaked, first words that made sense in days. They safe, child. They fine. Been waiting for you. How long? 6 days. You been gone 6 days. Sally tried to move, gasped at the pain that shot through her back. The wounds was healing, but they'd never fully heal. The scars would be massive, permanent, a map of suffering carved into her flesh. Silas? Sally asked, and in her voice was something new, something cold and patient and absolutely terrifying. He been by twice, Aunt Hester said, checking if you dead yet. Disappointed each time to find you breathing. A smile played at Sally's lips, though it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who'd made a promise to herself in the darkness between life and death. A promise she intended to keep. Good, Sally said. Let him be disappointed. Let him wonder. Let him fear. Over the next weeks, Sally healed slow but sure. The pain was constant, would be constant for the rest of her life, but she bore it like a badge of honor. Aunt Hester changed her bandages daily, each time marveling at how the wounds closed despite the severity. You got protection, the old woman said. Spirit protection, them ancestors watching over you close. Sally could feel it too. A presence that hadn't been there before the whipping, like she'd crossed into death's territory and come back with escorts, guardians who walked beside her invisible to mortal eyes. When she was strong enough to stand, Sally's mama brought the boys to her. Elijah and Moses stared at their mama like she was a ghost, then rushed forward, wrapping themselves around her legs, careful of her injuries. You came back, Elijah said, voice full of wonder. Told you I would, Sally replied, running her hands through their hair. Told you queens don't die easy. But even as she held her boys, even as joy and relief flooded through her, Sally's eyes looked past them, toward the big house where Silas Crowe lived. News had reached her during her recovery, news that made her blood boil colder than any fever. Silas had made good on his threat. Her boys was scheduled for auction in 2 weeks. To be sold separate, far apart, never to see each other again. And that, children, was when Sally stopped being just a survivor. That was when she became something else entirely. Something dangerous. Oh, children, prepare your hearts for what comes next, 'cause this is where cruelty showed its truest face. This is where the evil of slavery stripped away every pretense and revealed itself as the soul-destroying machine it always was. 2 weeks after Sally survived the impossible, after 500 lashes failed to kill her, Silas Crowe came to collect his revenge in a different currency. Not her body. He'd failed to break that. But her heart. Her soul. The 2 pieces of herself that walked on small legs and called her mama. Sally had been healing slow, working again despite the pain that shot through her back with every movement. Aunt Hester had protested, said she needed more time, but Sally knew better. She needed to prove her value, needed to show she could still work, needed to give Master Hawthorne no excuse to follow through on selling her boys. She picked tobacco with hands that shook from weakness, carried water buckets that made her scarred back scream, did everything humanly possible to demonstrate usefulness. But it didn't matter. Silas Crowe had made his decision, and Master Hawthorne, deep in debt and half drunk most days, had agreed. The boys would be sold. Example had to be made complete. The morning they came for Elijah and Moses, the sky was gray as ash, heavy with rain that refused to fall. Sally was in the tobacco field, bent over plants she could barely see through the tears she wouldn't let fall. She heard the commotion before she understood it. Shouting from the quarters, children crying, women wailing. Her mama's voice rose above the rest, screaming, "No, no, not the babies." Sally dropped her basket and ran, pain be damned. Scars splitting open be damned. Everything be damned except getting to her boys. She reached the quarters to find Silas Crowe standing outside her cabin, 2 white slave traders beside him, and her babies. Lord have mercy. Her babies being dragged out into the yard. Elijah fought like a wildcat despite being only 5 years old, kicking and biting at the traitor who held him. Moses screamed for his grandmother, for his mama, his little face wet with tears and terror. Both boys wore the clothes Sally had mended just last week, carried nothing else. They was being sold with only what was on their backs. "No!" Sally's voice tore from her throat like a physical thing. She ran forward, but 2 overseers grabbed her arms, held her back. "You can't. They just babies. They ain't even 6 years old." Silas Crowe turned to face her, and on his face was satisfaction deeper than any pleasure. This right here, this was what he'd wanted all along. Breaking her body had failed, but breaking her heart? That was succeeding beautifully. "Should have thought about that before you defied me," he said, voice cold as January frost. "Should have thought about your boys before you decided to play queen." "I'll do anything," Sally begged. Pride forgotten, dignity abandoned. "Anything you want. Just don't take my children. Please, I'm begging you." For a moment, something flickered in Silas's eyes. Maybe triumph, maybe shame, maybe both. Too late for begging now. Papers is signed. Money already changed hands. The traders were professionals, done this 1,000 times before. They had chains ready, small chains, child-sized shackles that made Sally's stomach turn. They locked iron cuffs around Elijah's and Moses's wrists, connecting them with a short length of chain between. Sally fought against the men holding her with strength born of desperation. "Let me go. Let me say goodbye. Please, just let me hold them one more time." Silas considered, then nodded. The overseers released Sally, and she fell to her knees in the dirt, crawling toward her boys. Her mama brought Elijah and Moses to her, all of them collapsing together in a heap of tears and terror. Sally pulled her sons close, breathing in their smell, memorizing the feel of their small bodies against hers. Her hands shook as she touched their faces, traced the lines of their features like she was trying to carve them into her memory forever. "Listen to me," she said, voice breaking but urgent. "Listen good. You remember who you are. You remember you come from queens and kings. You remember your papa loves you, your grandmother loves you. I love you more than the sky is wide. Mama, don't let them take us," Elijah sobbed, clutching her dress. "Please, Mama. I can't stop them, baby." The words tasted like poison. "But I swear on everything holy and unholy, and I'm gonna find you. I don't care how long it takes, I don't care what I got to do. I will find you and bring you home. Promise?" Moses whispered, his little voice breaking Sally's heart into smaller and smaller pieces. "I promise. On my life, I promise." Sally's mama pressed something into each boy's hand. Small mojo bags Aunt Hester had made, filled with protective roots and herbs. "Keep these close," she told them. "They gonna keep you safe till your mama come for you." "Time's up," one of the traders said, not unkindly but firm. "We got a schedule." They pulled the boys away. Elijah screamed, reaching back for his mama. Moses cried so hard he could barely breathe. Sally tried to follow, but the overseers grabbed her again, held her back as the traders loaded her children into a wagon. "Where are you taking them?" Sally shouted. "Tell me where they're going." "Charleston auction block," the trader called back. "After that, who knows? Sold separate, them's the orders." Charleston. 3 days journey south and then scattered to different plantations, different futures, different lives. Sally felt something break inside her chest. Felt the last piece of the girl she used to be die and something else, something fierce and terrible, take its place. The wagon pulled away, wheels creaking, horses plodding slow. Elijah and Moses' faces pressed against the wooden slats, hands reaching through, calling for their mama till their voices faded into the distance. Sally stood there until the wagon disappeared completely, until even the dust it raised had settled. Then she collapsed, a sound tearing from her throat that wasn't quite human. The cry of a mother losing her children, a sound old as humanity itself. The enslaved folks gathered around her, offering what comfort they could, but there was no comfort for this. Sally's mama held her, both women keening together, their grief so deep it seemed to shake the very earth. Aunt Hester knelt beside them, her ancient face streaming with tears. "We gonna get them back," she whispered. "Somehow we gonna get them back." But even the old root doctor's faith felt hollow in the face of this loss. For 3 days Sally didn't speak, didn't eat, barely moved. She sat in the cabin she'd shared with her boys, holding the wooden toys Jacob had carved, the bird and the horse, and stared at nothing. Folks was worried she'd lost her mind, that the grief had broken what 500 lashes couldn't. On the 4th day, Sally stood up. Her eyes was dry now, all the tears burned away, leaving something harder behind. She walked out of the cabin and headed straight for the big house, moving with purpose that made other enslaved folks scatter out of her way. Silas Crowe was on the porch cleaning his whip. He looked up as Sally approached, hand moving to the pistol at his belt. But Sally stopped at the bottom of the stairs. She didn't come closer, didn't make threats, didn't do nothing but look at him with eyes that held something ancient and implacable. "You think you won," Sally said, voice quiet but carrying clearly in the morning air. "You think taking my babies broke me." Silas said nothing, but his hand stayed on his pistol. "You wrong," Sally continued. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life. 'Cause now I got nothing left to lose, nothing left to fear, nothing keeping me from doing what needs to be done. You threatening me, girl?" Silas stood up, trying to reclaim dominance. Sally smiled, and it was the coldest smile anyone had ever seen. "No, sir, I ain't threatening. I'm promising. The ancestors is watching, justice is coming, and when it comes, it's gonna have my face." She turned and walked away, leaving Silas standing on that porch with a feeling he wasn't used to. Fear. Real, deep fear of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. That night, in the hush harbor deep in the woods, Sally met with the others who'd been whispering about resistance for years. Men and women who'd survived their own horrors, who'd lost their own children, their own loved ones to the auction block. "I'm done surviving," Sally told them. "I'm done bending. I'm done accepting. They took my boys. Time to take something back." Plans began to form in that clearing. Dangerous plans. Plans for escape, for resistance, for striking back at the system that had destroyed so many lives. Sally was at the center of it all. No longer a victim, but a general planning war. Aunt Hester came to her afterward, pulled her aside. "Child, what you planning gonna get you killed?" "Maybe," Sally agreed. "But I made a promise to my boys. I'm gonna keep it or die trying." The old woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you're gonna need this." She pressed something into Sally's hand. A small knife barely bigger than a finger, but sharp enough to cut through rope. Or flesh. "Where you get this?" Sally asked. "Don't matter. What matters is you use it right when the time comes. And the time coming soon. I seen it in my dreams." Sally tucked the knife away, feeling its weight against her skin. A weapon. Small, but enough. In the big house, Silas Crowe couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Sally's eyes, that cold promise in them. For the first time in his life, the hunter felt like prey. He should have been more afraid. Because Sally wasn't just planning escape. She was planning murder. Now listen close, children, 'cause this is where the hunted became the hunter, where the meek rose up like lions, where whispered prayers turned into plans of war. In them days of deep sorrow, resistance on a plantation wasn't loud or obvious. It was quiet as a snake moving through grass, patient as roots breaking stone, deadly as poison in sweet water. After her boys was taken, Sally changed in ways that made even the old ones nervous. She worked harder than before, faster, more efficiently, but her eyes was always watching, calculating, measuring distances and weaknesses. She sang the spirituals louder than ever, but folks who really listened heard different words woven into the familiar melodies. Codes, instructions, warnings. The Hush Harbor meetings grew more frequent, more focused. What had been prayer gatherings became planning sessions. Sally, despite being a woman in a world where men usually led, became the voice folks listened to most. She'd survived what should have killed her twice over, had faced down Silas Crowe multiple times, had nothing left to fear. That made her dangerous. That made her powerful. "We've been praying for freedom long enough," Sally told the gathered folks one moonless night, deep in the woods where no white ears could hear. "Time to make our own freedom. Time to take it." There was maybe 20 people in that clearing. Field hands, house servants, the blacksmith, the stable boy, even one of the drivers who'd grown sick of whipping his own people. All of them had scars, visible or invisible. All of them had lost someone to the auction block, to the whip, to the casual cruelty of slavery. "What you proposing?" asked Marcus, a strong-backed man who'd tried to run twice before and been caught both times, his back a map of punishment. "Underground railroad," Sally said. "We make contact, get a conductor to come through, and we run. Not just one or two folks, a whole group. Safety in numbers." "That's suicide," said Clara, a house servant who heard things the field hands didn't. "Master Hawthorne just bought 3 new bloodhounds, Silas training them himself. They catch a scent. They don't stop till they catch you or kill you." "Then we don't leave a scent," Sally replied. "We use the river, cover our tracks, move only on moonless nights. Aunt Hester teaching me root work, ways to confuse the dogs, make them lose the trail." "And if we get caught?" Marcus asked. "We all know what happens to runaways." Sally's hand unconsciously touched her back, feeling the scars through her dress. "We already living in hell. Dying trying to escape ain't worse than living like this. And I made a promise to my boys. I'm getting them back. Need help to do it." That shifted something in the group. Most of them had lost children too, sold away, scattered across the South like seeds in the wind. The pain in Sally's voice was their pain. Her rage was their rage. "I'm in," said Marcus. "Me too," added Clara. One by one they committed. Not everyone in the quarters would go. Some was too old, some too scared. Some had small babies they couldn't risk in flight. But these 20, they was ready to die for a chance at freedom. Sally organized them like a general planning a campaign. She assigned roles based on skills and strengths. Marcus and the other strong men would scout routes, test the river crossings, memorize landmarks. Clara and the house servants would listen for information, steal maps if they could, watch the master's movements. The blacksmith would make tools that could double as weapons, hammers that could break chains, files hidden in handle grips. And Sally, she would make contact with the Underground Railroad. This was the most dangerous part. The railroad wasn't an actual railroad, of course, but a network of secret routes and safe houses leading north to freedom. Conductors, brave souls, black and white, who risked everything to guide runaways, moved through the South like ghosts, leaving coded messages, using signals known only to those in the network. Sally had heard the songs all her life, had sung them herself, but understanding the codes was different from using them actively. Aunt Hester became her teacher, revealing knowledge the old woman had kept secret for decades. "The drinking gourd points north," Aunt Hester explained one night, drawing constellations in the dirt. "Follow the North Star, but don't just look up. Look for signs on the ground, quilts hanging certain ways, lanterns in windows, marks on trees." She taught Sally about safe houses, homes of abolitionists, Quakers mostly, who would hide runaways in cellars and attics despite laws that made helping slaves a crime. She taught her the passwords, the knocks, the ways to identify friend from enemy. "There's a conductor comes through every few months," Aunt Hester said. "Man they call Moses, but it ain't a man, it's a woman. Harriet Tubman herself. She the one you need. Harriet Tubman." The name was whispered like a prayer throughout the South. Former slave who'd escaped and come back, again and again to lead others to freedom. Carried a pistol, threatened to shoot anyone who tried to turn back and endanger the group. Never lost a passenger, they said. Never. "How I find her?" Sally asked. "You don't find her. She finds you. You send word through the network, leave signs, and if she coming, she'll come." Sally began leaving signs. A quilt hung in a specific pattern on her cabin door. The North Star pattern signaled to conductors that someone here was ready to run. She sang "Steal Away" at specific times, the song carrying across the fields to ears that might be listening. She made contact with a free black man who worked as a ferryman on the James River, passed him a message written in crude letters she'd taught herself. Help needed. Many souls ready. Queen Sally waiting. While waiting for response, Sally and her group prepared. They stole food bit by bit. Cornmeal, salt pork, dried beans, hiding it in the woods along their planned route. They made shoes from scraps of leather, stronger than the cheap brogans the plantation provided. They memorized the route north. Follow the river to the fork. Take the eastern branch, cross at the shallow point near the old mill, head for the moss-covered oak that marks the edge of Hawthorne property, then into the deep woods toward Maryland. But there was a problem. A traitor. His name was Samuel, not the same Samuel who was Sally's daddy, long sold away, but a different man, younger, scared. He'd agreed to join the escape plan, but then got cold feet. Fear ate at him till he couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. And one night, drunk on corn liquor he'd stolen from the still house, he went to Silas Crowe and confessed everything. Well, not everything. He didn't name names, didn't give up the whole plan, but he said enough. Slaves was planning to run, had been meeting in the woods, was making preparations. Silas Crowe listened with a smile that would have chilled hell itself. This was exactly the kind of information he'd been hoping for. Proof that Sally was behind resistance. Proof that would justify anything he decided to do to her. He didn't arrest anyone immediately. Instead, he watched, set traps, posted guards he didn't tell anyone about. Let the conspirators think they was safe while he gathered evidence. Sally didn't know about the betrayal yet. Didn't know Silas was watching every move. She was too focused on getting word to the Underground Railroad, on preparing for the moment when freedom would be within reach. Then one evening a stranger appeared at the edge of the quarters. An old man, looked like a wandering preacher, carrying a Bible and walking with a limp. He asked for water, for a place to rest his weary bones. The enslaved folks, suspicious of strangers, almost turned him away. But Sally saw the quilt pattern embroidered on his coat. Subtle, almost invisible, but there, the North Star, the signal. She approached him, offered water. "Long journey, Reverend." "Long indeed, sister," he replied. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw understanding. "Been traveling the river road, helping lost souls find their way home." River road. That was code. He was from the railroad. "Many souls lost around here," Sally said carefully, aware that others might be listening. "I heard tell. Heard there's a queen in these parts strong enough to survive 500 lashes, that true?" "Might be." "Well, this queen, if she exists, should know that Moses is coming. 2 weeks from the new moon. She'll know the signs. Harriet Tubman. Coming here, in 2 weeks." Sally's heart raced, but she kept her face calm. "I'll pass the word if I see this queen." The old man smiled, blessed her, and moved on. He was gone by morning, disappeared like he'd never been there. Sally gathered her group that night in the hush harbor. "It's happening," she told them. 2 weeks. We run in 2 weeks." Excitement and terror rippled through the group. 2 weeks to final preparations. 2 weeks to freedom or death. But Silas Crowe had heard about the stranger, had seen Sally talking to him, and he made his own preparations. He went to Sally's cabin that very night, kicked the door open, found her inside alone. Her mama was at a berth in another cabin. Aunt Hester was tending a sick child. Sally stood up from her pallet, faced him without flinching. "You planning something," Silas said. It wasn't a question. "Always planning something," Sally replied. "Planning to survive another day. Planning to see my boys again. Planning to outlive you." Silas pulled out a length of chain, heavy iron chain, the kind used to restrain the most dangerous prisoners. "Master Hawthorne says you've been acting suspicious. Says you need to be secured till we sort out what you up to." He moved toward her, chain ready. Sally backed up, hand moving to where Aunt Hester's knife was hidden in her dress. The cabin was small, nowhere to run. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Silas said, reaching for her. Sally's hand closed on the knife, but she didn't draw it. Not yet. Too many people would hear if they fought. She needed to be smart. She let him chain her, let him lock the heavy iron around her ankle, the other end fastened to a ring bolted into the cabin wall, a ring used to restrain violent slaves, though it hadn't been used in years. "You gonna stay here till I figure out what you planning," Silas said. "Gonna watch you close now." He left, locking the cabin door from outside. Sally sat on her pallet, chain weighing heavy on her ankle, and smiled in the darkness. Silas thought he'd trapped her, thought he'd stopped the escape, but he'd made a mistake, a fatal mistake. He'd come to her cabin, alone, at night. And now Sally knew his pattern, knew when he'd come back, knew exactly what she'd do when he did. Listen here now, children, because what I'm about to tell you is where justice and vengeance walked hand in hand through the darkest night. This is where the meek stopped turning the other cheek, where patience ran out like water from a broken jug, where a woman decided that some debts can only be paid in blood. The Lord may say vengeance is his, but sometimes he uses human hands to deliver it. Sally sat in that locked cabin for 3 days, chain heavy on her ankle, listening to the sounds of the plantation going about its business outside. Folks brought her food through a gap in the wall, cornbread, water, a bit of fatback when they could spare it. Her mama came and wept outside the door, begging Silas to let her daughter go. Aunt Hester slipped her herbs through the cracks, roots for strength, powders for courage. But Sally didn't need herbs for what she was planning. She needed only the knife hidden in her dress, the chain that bound her, and the certainty that Silas Crowe would come back. Men like him always came back. Their cruelty had patterns, predictable as the seasons. She used those 3 days to prepare. Tested the chain, learned its weight, its length, how it moved and sounded. Practiced wrapping it around her hands in the darkness, getting the feel of it as a weapon instead of a restraint. The chain was maybe 6 feet long, heavy iron links meant to hold a man twice her size. It would do what needed doing. Aunt Hester had taught her about killing, though not in words so plain. Taught her which roots could stop a heart, which herbs could make a man sleep forever. But Sally didn't want poison, didn't want it to look like sickness or accident. She wanted Silas Crowe to know, in his final moments, exactly who was taking his life and why. On the 3rd night, just after midnight, when the quarters had gone quiet and even the dogs had stopped their restless pacing, Sally heard the lock turn in her cabin door. She was ready. Silas Crowe entered carrying a lantern, his whip coiled at his belt as always, a bottle of whiskey in his other hand. He'd been drinking. She could smell it before she saw him, that sour scent of corn liquor and bad intentions. His eyes was red-rimmed, his walk unsteady. "Evenin', Sally," he said, setting the lantern down. "Thought you might be lonely, chained up in here all by yourself." Sally sat on her pallet, back against the wall, hands folded in her lap. Looked like submission, was actually readiness. "Come to check on me, Massa Crowe?" she asked, voice flat and empty. He laughed, ugly sound like gravel in a tin cup. "Come to remind you of your place. Come to show you what happens to slaves who forget their property." He moved closer, and Sally could see the lust mixed with hate in his eyes. Same look he'd had for years, that twisted desire to possess and destroy at the same time. He reached for her, hand grabbing her chin rough, forcing her to look at him. "You ain't so proud now, are you? All chained up, boys sold away, nowhere to run." "No, sir," Sally said quietly. "I ain't proud at all." That's what he wanted to hear. His grip loosened slightly, false sense of victory making him careless. He took another swig from his bottle, set it aside, started unbuckling his belt. "Gonna teach you a lesson you won't forget," he muttered. Sally waited till he was close enough, till his attention was divided, till the whiskey made him slower than he should be. Then she moved. Fast as a snake striking, she grabbed the chain with both hands and swung it up and around, looping it over Silas's head and pulling tight around his neck. The heavy iron links caught him completely by surprise, cut off the shout before it could leave his throat. Silas grabbed at the chain, trying to pull it loose, but Sally was behind him now, using his own weight against him, pulling with all the strength she'd built, hauling cotton sacks and water buckets, all the rage she'd stored up through years of torment. "This is for Isaiah," she hissed in his ear as he struggled. "This is for my boys. This is for every soul you tortured." Silas thrashed, powerful, strong, even drunk, his boots scraping against the floor, hands clawing at the chain cutting into his windpipe. He tried to reach back for her, tried to throw himself backward to crush her against the wall, but Sally held on like she was wrestling the devil himself. And maybe she was. His face went red, then purple, eyes bulging like a fish pulled from water, mouth opening and closing, desperate for air that wouldn't come. The chain bit deep into his throat, cutting through flesh, crushing the windpipe beneath. Sally's arms burned with the effort of holding on, muscles screaming, but she didn't let go. Couldn't let go. This man had sold her children, had whipped her 500 times, had tried to break her spirit and her body. This man represented everything evil about slavery, every cruelty, every violation. "You gonna die knowing a slave killed you," Sally whispered. "You gonna die knowing you lost. You gonna die knowing I won." Silas's struggles grew weaker. His hands fell from the chain, dropped to his sides. His knees buckled, and Sally went down with him, chain still tight, still pulling, making absolutely sure. She counted to 100, slow and steady, while Silas Crowe's body went from struggling to twitching to completely still. Even then, she counted another 100. Couldn't afford to make a mistake. Couldn't afford for him to survive and tell what happened. Finally, when she was certain, absolutely certain, she released the chain. Silas collapsed face first onto the cabin floor, neck bent at an angle that told its own story. His eyes was open, staring at nothing, the last expression on his face one of shock and disbelief. Dead. The overseer was dead. Sally sat back on her pallet, breathing hard, her whole body shaking now that it was done. She looked at her hands. They was trembling, covered in sweat, but not blood. The chain had done its work clean. For a moment, she felt nothing. Empty. Like she'd poured out everything inside herself into that act of killing, and now there was just hollow space. Then feeling rushed back in a flood. Not guilt. No, she felt no guilt for this, but fear. Fear of what would happen when they found the body, when they realized what she'd done. Fear mixed with savage satisfaction. Justice served cold and final. She heard movement outside, footsteps approaching, her mama's voice whispering urgent through the wall crack. "Sally? Child?" I heard sounds. "You all right?" "I'm fine, Mama," Sally called back, voice surprisingly steady. "Everything gonna be fine now." But her mama heard something in her tone, understood without being told. "Sweet Jesus," the older woman breathed. "What you done?" "What I had to do." Silence. Then, "We gotta move fast. Get you out of here before—" "No." Sally's voice was firm. "Not yet, got to make this look right." She thought fast, mind racing through possibilities. They'd find the body at dawn when someone came to bring her breakfast. She could claim he tried to violate her, she defended herself. Some might believe it. But more likely, they'd hang her without trial. Example made swift and brutal. Unless she wasn't here when they found him. The escape plan. It was supposed to happen in 2 weeks when Harriet Tubman came through. But circumstances had changed. She needed to run now, tonight, before Silas's body was discovered. Sally examined the chain on her ankle. The padlock was good quality, but the ring bolted to the wall was old, rusted. She grabbed the chain and pulled, testing it. The bolts groaned but held. She pulled harder, using the wall for leverage, putting her full weight into it. The wood around the bolts was old, weakened by years of moisture. One bolt shifted, just slightly. Again. Pull. Strain. Scar tissue on her back screamed in protest. Wounds still not fully healed, tearing open again. Blood seeped through her dress, but Sally didn't stop. The bolt gave way with a crack that sounded loud as thunder in the small cabin. Sally fell backward, chain still attached to her ankle but no longer attached to the wall. She was mobile, chained, but mobile. Her mama was already working on the cabin door from outside, using tools the blacksmith had slipped her. The lock clicked open just as the first roosters started crowing. Dawn coming, time running out. Sally grabbed Silas's whip, the justiciera that had caused so much pain. Took his pistol too, loaded and ready. Left his body where it lay. Stepped out into the pre-dawn darkness where her mama waited with Aunt Hester, and 3 others from the escape group, Marcus, Clara, and the blacksmith Thomas. "We running now," Sally said. "All of us. We run or we die, but we ain't staying." "The conductor ain't here yet," Marcus protested. "We don't know the full route." "I know enough. We head for the river, follow it north, look for the signs. We move fast. We can get ahead of the search party." Aunt Hester pressed something into Sally's hand. A small pouch. "Goofer dust," she said. "Spread it on your trail. Confuse the dogs. And this, another pouch, different herbs. For your back, it bleeding again." "You coming?" Sally asked the old woman. Aunt Hester shook her head. "Too old for running. But I'll slow them down here, give you time. You go, you live. You get to freedom and you tell our story, promise me." Sally hugged the ancient root doctor, this woman who'd brought her into the world and taught her how to survive it. "I promise." They moved into the darkness, 5 souls fleeing toward uncertain freedom. Behind them, in the locked cabin, Silas Crowe's body was growing cold. The overseer's reign of terror was over, but the manhunt was just beginning. Now, children, what I'm about to tell you is how 5 souls ran through hell itself chasing freedom. This is where the hunted became hunters of their own destiny, where every step was a prayer, and every breath could be your last. The night was thick as molasses when they slipped away from Hawthorne Plantation, moving through shadows like ghosts returning to the world of the living. Sally led them, chain still dragging from her ankle, no time to remove it, and the blacksmith Thomas didn't have the right tools. Every step, that iron scraped against the ground, making noise that set Sally's teeth on edge. But they moved anyway, through the quarters where folks pretended to sleep but watched through cracks, knowing what was happening, praying for success but too scared to join. They reached the edge of the tobacco fields just as the sky started turning from black to gray. Dawn was coming too fast, bringing with it discovery and pursuit. "We need to move faster," Marcus whispered, looking back toward the plantation. "They gonna find the body soon." "Can't move faster with this chain," Sally said, frustration sharp in her voice. Thomas knelt beside her, examining the shackle by the faint pre-dawn light. "I can break it, but it gonna make noise. Lot of noise." "Do it," Sally ordered. "We far enough from the quarters now." The blacksmith pulled a small hammer and chisel from his bag, tools he'd smuggled out hidden in his clothes. He positioned the chisel against the chain link, raised the hammer. "Wait!" Clara hissed. "You hear that?" They all froze, listening. In the distance, barely audible, the sound of dogs barking. The bloodhounds. Already they'd discovered something wrong, or maybe Silas's body had been found earlier than expected. "No time," Sally said. "Break it now." Thomas swung the hammer. The clang of metal on metal rang out loud in the morning quiet, echoing across the fields. Once, twice, 3 times. The chain link cracked, then broke. Sally pulled her foot free. The shackle still around her ankle, but the chain gone. "Run," she commanded. They ran. Through the tobacco fields. trampling plants that represented Master Hawthorne's wealth, down into the hollow where the river cut through the land. Brown water moving steady toward the James. The plan was to follow the river north, using the water to hide their scent from the dogs. But the river was swollen from recent rains, moving faster than normal, deeper than it should be. The crossing point they'd scouted was underwater now, too dangerous to attempt. "There's another crossing 2 miles upstream," Marcus said, breathing hard. "But it's closer to the main road, more chance of being seen." Sally looked back. The dogs' barking was getting louder, closer. They didn't have 2 miles, they barely had 2 minutes. "We swim here," she decided. "Now." "I can't swim good," Clara admitted, fear in her voice. "Then you hold on to me," Sally said. "We all going across or we all drowning, but we ain't going back." They waded into the river, the cold water shocking after the warmth of running. The current grabbed at them immediately, trying to pull them downstream. Sally kept Clara close, one arm around the terrified woman, the other pulling them both through the water. Thomas and Marcus were stronger swimmers, made it across first. Sally's mama, old but stubborn, fought her way through the current with determination born of watching her daughter nearly die too many times. Sally and Clara were halfway across when the shackle still on Sally's ankle caught on something underwater. A submerged branch or rock, she couldn't tell. Her foot yanked down, pulling her under. Water filled her nose and mouth, the river suddenly dark and terrifying. Clara screamed, lost her grip on Sally, started to go under herself. Marcus dove back in, grabbed Clara, pulled her toward the far bank. Sally struggled with the caught shackle, lungs burning, the weight of the iron dragging her down. In her mind, she saw her boys' faces, heard Elijah asking if she'd find them, heard her own promise echoing in the darkness. Not like this, she thought desperately. Not drowned in a river when freedom's so close. She yanked her foot hard, feeling the metal cut into her ankle, feeling skin tear and blood flow into the water. One more pull, savage and desperate, and the shackle slipped free. She kicked toward the surface, broke through gasping, and swam for the far bank with strokes powered by pure will to survive. They collapsed on the riverbank, soaked and exhausted. No time to rest, though. Behind them, on the plantation side of the river, they could see torches now, hear men shouting. The search party was organized, mounted, armed. "Move," Sally ordered, though her own body was screaming for rest. "Into the woods, deep as we can get." They ran through forest that grew thicker with every step. Pine trees gave way to oak and hickory, underbrush grabbing at their clothes, branches whipping their faces. Sally spread Aunt Hester's gopher dust on their trail as they ran. The conjure powder meant to confuse the dogs, break the scent trail. Whether it was the dust or the river or pure luck, the sound of the bloodhounds faded behind them. For now. They ran until the sun was fully up, until their legs gave out, until they literally couldn't take another step. Found a thick stand of mountain laurel and collapsed into it, hidden from view, gasping for breath. "We made it," Clara whispered, like she couldn't believe it. "We actually made it off the plantation." "We ain't free yet," Sally reminded her. "Still in Virginia, still enslaved territory. We got maybe 100 miles to Maryland, to the Free States. Long way to go." Her mama checked Sally's ankle where the shackle had cut deep. Blood still seeped from the wound, mixing with the river water that soaked her dress. "This gonna get infected if we don't treat it proper. It'll have to wait." Sally pulled dried meat from the small pack they'd managed to grab, supplies they'd been storing for the planned escape. "Eat. Rest 1 hour. Then we move again. Can't stop long." As they ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, Marcus spoke up. "What you think happened back there, when they found the body?" Sally's face was hard as stone. "I think they found exactly what they deserved to find. A dead overseer and proof that we ain't taking it no more. They gonna hang us if they catch us now," Thomas said. "Not just whip us or sell us, hang us for murder. Then they ain't gonna catch us." Sally's voice carried absolute conviction. "We keep moving. We find the railroad, we get north. We survive. That's what we do. We survive. The hour passed too quick. They got up on legs that didn't want to work, backs that screamed protest, and moved deeper into the wilderness. By midday, they'd put maybe 10 miles between themselves and the plantation. Not enough. Would never be enough until they crossed into free territory. They traveled by day because the dogs hunted by night, followed the river when they could, cut through forest when they had to, avoided roads completely, avoided any sign of human habitation, lived on what they'd brought and what they could forage, berries, roots, once a rabbit Thomas managed to snare. 3 days they traveled like this, 3 days of constant movement, constant fear, constant watching over their shoulders. Sally's ankle swelled up bad, infected like her mama warned. Fever started setting in, making the world wobble and shift, but she didn't stop, couldn't stop. On the 4th day, they reached what Sally recognized from Aunt Hester's descriptions, an old oak tree with a specific pattern of moss, marking a safe house. The tree stood at the edge of a small farm, modest place with fields of corn and a weathered house. "This is it," Sally said, "the first station on the railroad." They approached careful, watching for tricks or traps. A white woman came out of the house, middle-aged, plain dress, Quaker bonnet. She saw them and made a quick gesture, a specific hand signal Aunt Hester had taught Sally, the sign of recognition. "Friends of a friend?" the woman asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Friends of Moses," Sally replied, using Harriet Tubman's code name. The woman's face relaxed. "Come inside, quick now, before anyone sees." They stumbled into the house, into a cellar hidden behind a false wall. Inside was bread, water, medical supplies. The woman tended Sally's infected ankle, gave them all real food, news from the outside world. "There's a reward for you," she told Sally. $500 for the woman who killed Overseer Crowe. They got patrollers on every road watching the river crossings. "We need to get to the next station," Sally said. "How far?" 40 miles north. Through rough country, and there's Confederate pickets. Wars heating up between the states. Dangerous times. "More dangerous to go back," Sally replied. They rested 2 days in that cellar, healing, planning. Then moved on with directions to the next safe house, the next station on the long road to freedom. Weeks passed in a blur of running, hiding, narrow escapes. Once they hid in a hay wagon while slave catchers searched the very barn they was in. Once they crossed a bridge just minutes before patrollers set up a checkpoint. Once Sally had to use Silas's pistol, fired a shot over the heads of men tracking them, bought enough time to disappear into a swamp. Each station brought them closer. Each conductor risked their life to pass them forward. The network held, guided them, protected them as best it could, until the night they reached the Chesapeake, nearly to Maryland, nearly to freedom. They was crossing through a cornfield in the darkness when shots rang out. Patrollers. Had to be. Maybe a dozen men on horseback surrounding the field, cutting off escape. "Scatter," Sally shouted. "Meet at the oak we passed a mile back." They split up, running in different directions. Sally heard more gunfire, heard Clara scream. Saw her mama go down. Hit or just fallen, she couldn't tell. A bullet whizzed past Sally's head, close enough to feel the heat. She dove into a drainage ditch, crawled through mud and water, kept moving. More shots, men shouting, dogs barking. Sally ran through the night, alone now, separated from the others. Ran until a bullet caught her, just a graze across her ribs, but enough to spin her around, send her tumbling down an embankment into dark water. The river, or maybe a creek she couldn't tell, carried her downstream. She went limp, let it take her, hoping the current would carry her away from the search, away from the bullets and the dogs and the death that chased her. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was the North Star shining bright overhead. Shining like a promise. Like hope that refused to die. Listen close now, children, 'cause this is where a woman became more than flesh and bone, where suffering transformed into purpose, where one life touched by the ancestors began to light the way for hundreds more. The creek spit Sally out 3 miles downstream. deposited her on a muddy bank like driftwood washed up after a storm. She lay there unconscious, bleeding from the bullet graze, ankle still infected, body pushed beyond what any mortal should endure. But the ancestors wasn't done with her yet. No, sir. A conductor on the Underground Railroad found her at first light. Man named Samuel, free black, who'd bought his freedom 20 years prior and devoted his life to guiding others to liberation. He was checking the usual routes when he saw her there, half in the water, half out, looking like death itself had claimed her. "Lord have mercy," he whispered, checking for a pulse. Found one, weak but stubborn. This woman wasn't ready to cross over yet. Samuel carried Sally to his wagon hidden in the woods, covered her with hay and burlap, drove her to the next station, a Quaker farmhouse just across the Maryland line. Free territory. She'd made it, though she didn't know it yet. The Quaker family and the Hendersons, their name was. They took her in without question, laid her in a real bed with clean sheets, something Sally hadn't felt since she was born. The wife, Margaret Henderson, tended Sally's wounds with practiced hands. She'd nursed dozens of freedom seekers, seen every kind of injury slavery could inflict. "This one's been through hell," Margaret told her husband. "Look at her back. Lord God, what they did to this woman." Sally drifted in and out of consciousness for days. When fever took her, she raved in multiple languages, called out names of people living and dead. The Hendersons heard her cry for Elijah and Moses, understood she'd lost children, heard her whisper about 500 lashes, about a chain, about justice delivered in darkness. When Sally finally woke fully, nearly a week after Samuel found her, the first thing she saw was sunlight streaming through a window. Real glass window, not a hole in a cabin wall. She tried to sit up, gasped at the pain that shot through her ribs. "Easy now," Margaret said, appearing at her bedside. "You've been shot, near drowned, and half-starved. Take it slow. Where am I?" Sally's voice was rough as gravel. "Maryland, free state. You made it, dear. You're free. Free." The word didn't make sense at first. How could she be free when her boys was still in chains? When her mama and the others might be dead or captured? "The others," Sally croaked. "The people I was with." Margaret's face grew somber. "Samuel found your mother 2 days later. She made it across, sick but alive. She's resting in the next room. The others..." She paused. "We don't know yet. The network is still searching. Sally's mama, alive. Thank God for small mercies." Over the next weeks, as Sally healed, the news filtered in through the railroad network. Marcus had made it to Pennsylvania, was working on a farm there. Thomas the blacksmith got caught at the border, sold back into slavery further south. Clara was missing, fate unknown. The losses hurt, but they'd known the risks. Sally spent her recovery planning. The Hendersons offered to help her settle in the North, find work as a free woman, start a new life. But Sally had made promises she intended to keep. "I got to go back," she told Margaret one evening. "My boys is still down there, and there's hundreds more waiting for someone brave enough to lead them out." "That's suicide," Margaret protested. "You're wanted for murder in Virginia. There's a price on your head. You go back, they'll hang you. Then I'll die trying. But I ain't living free while my children in chains." Word of Sally's escape had spread through the slave quarters of Virginia like wildfire. The story grew with each telling. The woman who survived 500 lashes, who killed the overseer with his own chains, who walked through bullets and rivers to freedom. Some folks said she had supernatural protection, that the ancestors walked beside her visible as daylight. Others claimed she could conjure, could turn invisible, could speak to animals. The truth was simpler and more powerful. Sally was just a woman who refused to break, who turned suffering into strength, who loved her children more than she feared death. 3 months after reaching freedom, Sally made her first return trip south. Against everyone's advice, against all reason, she went back into slave territory as a conductor on the Underground Railroad. She learned from the best, spent time with Harriet Tubman herself, the legendary Moses, who'd made 19 trips south and never lost a passenger. Harriet taught her the routes, the signals, the passwords. Taught her to carry a pistol and be willing to use it, not just on slave catchers, but on runaways who got cold feet and threatened to turn back. "You get scared, I understand," Harriet told her new student. "But you endanger the group. You put my gun to your head and decide. Go forward to freedom or die here. Ain't no third option." Sally understood. She'd lived by similar rules her whole life. Her first raid as a conductor was modest. 5 souls from a plantation in Northern Virginia. She led them through forests she knew from her own escape, used safe houses the railroad had established, got all 5 across the border without incident. Word spread. The woman they called Queen Sally, or Sally of the Scars, was back in the business of stealing master's property. The rewards for her capture climbed. $500 became $1,000, then $1,500. But Sally was careful, cunning, blessed by something beyond luck. Over the next 2 years, she made 7 trips south, brought out 43 people total. Old folks, young folks, families torn apart by auction blocks, individuals desperate for freedom. She reunited separated spouses, guided children to parents they hadn't seen in years. And always, she searched for information about her own boys, Elijah and Moses, where they'd been sold, who owned them now, whether they still lived. The answer came on her 8th trip south from an old woman in a Charleston slave market who remembered the auction 2 years prior. "Them boys you asking about," the woman said. "One went to a rice plantation on the coast, Wexford Place. The other got sold to a cotton plantation in Georgia, Blackwood Estate. Separated, just like Silas had promised, but at least they lived. At least Sally knew where to find them. The rice plantation came first. Wexford Place on the Sea Islands of South Carolina, where the Gullah people maintained African traditions stronger than anywhere else in America. Sally spent 3 weeks preparing, studying the plantation's layout, identifying which buildings held which slaves, learning the patrol schedules. The raid happened on a moonless night in early autumn. Sally led a team of 3 other conductors, all of them armed, all of them prepared to die rather than return to bondage. They moved through the rice fields like shadows, using bird calls to signal, following maps drawn from memory and whispered intelligence. They found the children's quarters near midnight. Inside, maybe 20 young souls slept on pallets, exhausted from a day's labor in the rice paddies. Sally moved among them with a lantern turned low, examining faces, looking for the one she'd kissed goodbye 2 years ago. And there, Lord of Glory, there he was. Bigger now, 7 years old instead of 5, but still her Elijah. Same eyes, same serious expression even in sleep, same birthmark on his left shoulder. Sally knelt beside him, hand gentle on his shoulder. "Elijah, baby, wake up." His eyes opened, confused, frightened. Started to cry out, but Sally covered his mouth gentle like, "Shh, baby, it's Mama. I came for you like I promised." Recognition dawned slow, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Mama?" Voice small and wondering. "You real?" "I'm real, baby. And we leaving. Tonight. I'm taking you to freedom." They took 15 children that night, including Elijah. The youngest was 4, the oldest 12. Led them through swamps and forests, across rivers, hiding by day and traveling by night. It took 3 weeks to get them all to safety, but Sally delivered every single child to freedom. Elijah stayed close to his mama the whole journey, like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let her out of his sight. At night, when they rested, he'd tell her everything that happened since the auction, the beatings, the hunger, the loneliness. Sally listened and held him, and promised him Moses would join them soon. 1 boy down, 1 to go. The legend of Queen Sally grew with every successful raid. Plantation owners in 3 states knew her name, feared her appearance. Enslaved folks whispered prayers to her, asking for deliverance. She became more than a woman. She became a symbol, a promise that resistance was possible, that freedom could be seized rather than granted. But the most dangerous raid was still ahead. Moses waited in Georgia, and Sally was coming for him. Nothing would stop her. Not slave catchers, not bloodhounds, not the Confederate Army itself. She'd made a promise to her boy, and Queen Sally always kept her promises. Now steel yourself, children, 'cause this is where hope and terror walked hand in hand, where a mother's love faced down the full machinery of slavery's violence. Georgia, in 1859, was powder keg waiting for a spark, tensions rising between North and South, whispers of war on every tongue. And into this dangerous place walked Sally, hunting for the last piece of her broken heart. Blackwood Estate sat deep in Georgia's cotton country, sprawling plantation with 300 enslaved souls working fields that stretched to the horizon. The master, Colonel Thaddeus Blackwood, was known throughout the South for his cruelty and his paranoia. He'd heard tales of Queen Sally, had tripled his patrols, armed his overseers with rifles, threatened to shoot any slave caught even humming spirituals that might be codes. Sally spent 2 months preparing for this raid. Couldn't rush it, couldn't make mistakes. Moses was 9 years old now. Would he even remember her? Would he trust a stranger claiming to be the mama who disappeared from his life 4 years ago? She made contact through the network, sent word through the slave grapevine that reached across state lines. A message for a boy named Moses, sold from Virginia, telling him his mama was coming, telling him to be ready. Whether the message reached him, she couldn't know, but she had to try. The raid was set for late November, when cotton harvest was done and guards might be less vigilant. Sally assembled a team of 5, all experienced conductors, all armed, all understanding this might be a one-way journey. Among them was Elijah, now 8 years old and insisting on helping rescue his brother. Too dangerous, Sally had argued. You safe in Philadelphia, you free, can't risk you. He's my brother, Elijah replied, voice carrying the same iron will his mama had. You taught me family sticks together. I'm coming. Sally couldn't argue with her own teachings. The boy came. They entered Georgia from the north, moving through forest and swamp, avoiding roads completely. The countryside was tense, militias drilling in town squares, talk of secession and war everywhere. Dangerous times to be traveling, especially for black folks whose free papers might or might not be respected. 5 days they traveled before reaching Blackwood Estate, set up camp in a cypress swamp 2 miles from the plantation, using the thick vegetation and dark water as cover. Sally scouted alone, moving through the night like a ghost, observing patterns, counting guards, mapping escape routes. The slave quarters at Blackwood was bigger than any she'd seen. Rows and rows of cabins housing the massive labor force. Finding one boy among 300 souls would be near impossible. Except Sally had one advantage. Moses had been taught to read before he was taken. She'd made sure of that in the brief years she'd had him. She left a message scratched in charcoal on the wall of the praise house, place enslaved folks gathered on Sundays. The bird your papa carved is flying north. Meet where the moon touches water. Cryptic, but Moses would understand. The wooden bird Jacob had carved was his treasure, mentioned in every message Sally had sent through the network. And where moon touches water, the old pond at the edge of the quarters where light reflected at night. 2 nights passed with no response. Sally waited in the swamp, fear gnawing at her. What if Moses couldn't read the message? What if he'd forgotten or been sold again, or died from the brutal labor? On the 3rd night, a figure appeared at the pond's edge, small, cautious, looking around like a rabbit ready to bolt. Sally's breath caught. The size was right, the age was right, but the distance and darkness made recognition impossible. She made the signal, a mourning dove call, specific pattern Jacob used to whistle. The figure froze, then repeated the call back. Lord have mercy, he remembered. Sally moved from the trees, slow and careful. The boy turned, and even in the darkness she knew. Moses. Her baby. Alive, healthy enough, grown tall like his brother. Moses, she whispered. Mama. Voice breaking with disbelief and hope. They said you was dead. I ain't dead, baby. I'm here, and I'm taking you home. Moses ran to her then, crashed into her arms with force that nearly knocked her down. He was crying, shaking, holding on like he'd never let go. Sally wrapped him up, breathing in the smell of him, memorizing the feel of his heartbeat against hers. "Elijah's here too," she told him. "Your brother's here." "Elijah?" Moses pulled back, eyes wide. "He's alive. Alive and free, waiting in the swamp, but we gotta move fast. Can you run?" "I can run, Mama. I can run fast." But leaving wouldn't be simple. As they moved toward the swamp, alarm bells started ringing at the big house. Someone had noticed Moses missing, or maybe a patroller had spotted movement. Didn't matter which, the result was the same. Chaos erupted. Dogs released, torches lit, men on horseback spreading out to search the plantation perimeter. Sally and Moses ran, but the boy had been worked hard, was tired, couldn't match her pace. "I got you," Sally said, scooping him up despite the pain in her back, despite the scars that still ached. "Hold tight." They reached the swamp just as the first patrol came into view. The team was ready, Elijah among them, face lighting up when he saw his brother. No time for reunions, though. Not yet. "Move," Sally ordered, and they plunged into the swamp. The water was chest deep in places, filled with snakes and gators, roots grabbing at feet. But it was also impossible for horses, difficult for dogs, and provided cover from gunfire. They slogged through mud and decay, following paths only Sally knew, heading for the far side where dry ground and freedom waited. Behind them, Colonel Blackwood himself had joined the hunt, rallying his men with promises of rewards. "That's Queen Sally," he shouted. "The woman's worth $2,000, and anyone who brings back that runaway boy gets 100. Shots rang out, bullets whipping through the cypress trees. One caught the conductor beside Sally, dropped him into the water. The man surfaced, clutching his shoulder, blood spreading dark. "Leave me," he gasped. "I'll slow them down, get the boys out." No time to argue, no time to grieve. Sally and the others pushed forward, carrying Moses when he tired, Elijah helping despite his own exhaustion. They emerged from the swamp onto a dirt road just as the first light of dawn painted the sky. A wagon waited there. Contact from the railroad, risking everything to provide transport. They piled in, covered themselves with hay and burlap, and the wagon lurched into motion. The driver, an old white man with abolitionist convictions, drove like the devil himself was chasing. Maybe he was. Behind them, they could hear pursuit, horses and dogs and angry men determined that Queen Sally wouldn't escape again. But the driver knew these roads, knew shortcuts through forest and creek. By the time the sun was fully up, they'd put 10 miles between themselves and Blackwood Estate. They switched wagons twice, changed routes 3 times, used every trick the railroad had developed over decades. The journey north took 3 weeks, constantly pursued, constantly alert, sleeping in snatches and eating on the move. But they made it, crossed into Pennsylvania just as the first snow began to fall, winter coming early that year. The safe house there, a barn owned by Quakers who'd been helping runaways for 20 years, welcomed them like family. Sally finally let herself collapse, let herself feel the exhaustion and fear she'd been holding back. Her boys were safe, both of them. Together again after 4 years of separation and suffering. That night, in the warmth of the barn with clean hay and warm blankets, Sally lay between Elijah and Moses, arms around both of them, and wept. Tears of relief, of joy, of grief for all the lost years and all the trauma her children had endured. "We free?" Moses whispered like he couldn't quite believe it. "We free, baby," Sally confirmed. "All 3 of us, we free." Elijah touched the scars on Sally's back visible through her thin dress. "Did it hurt, Mama? The 500 lashes?" "It hurt," Sally admitted. "But it taught me something important. It taught me that we stronger than they know, that we can survive anything they throw at us, that we unbreakable." The boys fell asleep in her arms, safe for the first time in years. Sally stayed awake listening to them breathe, feeling their heartbeats, thanking every ancestor and spirit that had guided her to this moment. Outside, the first major snowstorm of winter buried the roads, making pursuit impossible. By the time it melted, Sally and her boys would be in Canada, beyond the reach of American slave catchers, beyond the reach of the Fugitive Slave Act. The news of Queen Sally's successful rescue of both her children spread through the abolitionist network like wildfire. The legend grew larger. The woman who'd been whipped 500 times, who'd killed an overseer, who'd made 2 daring raids deep into slave territory and emerged victorious both times. But as 1860 dawned and war clouds gathered on the horizon, Sally's work was far from over. She'd saved her own children, yes, but there were thousands more still in bondage, thousands more waiting for someone brave enough to lead them out. The war was coming. The great reckoning between North and South, freedom and slavery, was almost here. And Sally, bearing her scars like badges of honor, was ready to fight, ready to lead, ready to see the whole cursed system of slavery burn to the ground. Now gather close one last time, children, because this is where we bring the circle round, where the story of suffering transforms into testimony, where one woman's journey becomes the roadmap for a people's liberation. The final chapter ain't about one battle or one escape. It's about a lifetime of resistance, about what happens when you refuse to let evil have the last word. The years that followed the reunion was painted in fire and blood. In April 1861, Confederate guns opened fire on Fort Sumter, and the war Sally had felt coming finally arrived. The great conflict between North and South, between slavery and freedom, between the old world built on chains and a new world struggling to be born. Sally was 43 years old when the war started, her body bearing the marks of every battle she'd fought. The scars on her back had never fully healed, created patterns that looked like maps of rivers or roads, the very routes she'd used to lead folks to freedom. Her ankle, where the shackle had cut deep, bore a permanent indent, a reminder of the chain she'd broken. But her eyes, Lord of glory, her eyes still burned with fire that 500 lashes couldn't extinguish. She didn't fight in the war directly, though many black men did, joining the Union Army to strike blows against their former masters. Instead, Sally fought her own war, continued her work with the Underground Railroad even as battles raged across the South. The chaos of war made it easier in some ways. Plantation owners distracted, patrols thin, Confederate soldiers too busy fighting Yankees to chase runaways. In those war years, Sally made her most daring raids, led groups of 50, 60, even 70 souls at once, moving them like an army through Confederate territory. She became a legend whispered about in slave quarters and feared in plantation houses. Some called her a witch, said she could turn invisible or speak to spirits. Truth was simpler. She knew the land, knew the routes, knew how to read the signs of pursuit, and she absolutely refused to leave anyone behind. Elijah and Moses, grown into young men during the war, joined her work. Elijah became a conductor himself, using the reading and writing Sally had taught him to forge travel papers for runaways. Moses, remembering the rice plantations of his childhood, specialized in raids along the coast. Together, the three of them were unstoppable. The turning point came in January 1863, when President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Sally was in Philadelphia when the news arrived, standing in a church packed with free blacks and abolitionists, waiting to hear if the rumors was true. When the announcement came that all enslaved people in Confederate states were declared free, the church erupted. Folks cried, shouted, sang spirituals at the top of their lungs. Sally stood silent in the midst of the celebration, tears streaming down her face. "We did it," Elijah said, putting his arm around his mama. "We won." But Sally shook her head. "Not yet, baby. Proclamation is just words on paper. Freedom ain't real till every chain is broken, till every auction block is burned, till the last enslaved soul walks free." She was right. The war dragged on 2 more brutal years. Sally kept working, kept raiding, kept bringing people out even as battles raged around them. She survived close calls that should have killed her, bullets that missed by inches, rivers that nearly drowned her, slave catchers who came within feet of catching her but somehow never did. The ancestors was still watching over her. The spirits still walked beside her. April 1865 brought the end. Lee surrendered at Appomattox. The Confederacy collapsed. And slavery, that ancient evil that had poisoned America since its founding, was finally, officially, legally dead. Sally was in Virginia when she heard, back on Hawthorne Plantation territory for the first time since she'd escaped. The plantation was ruins now, burned during the war. Master Hawthorne dead from drink and debt, the fields grown over with weeds. She walked through the quarters where she'd been born, where she'd been branded, where she'd raised her boys. The old whipping post still stood, weathered and cracked but upright. Sally approached it, placed her hand on the wood stained with the blood of countless victims. She thought of Isaiah, hanged from a tree. Thought of her daddy Samuel, sold away. Thought of Aunt Hester, who died during the war but whose spirit Sally felt even now. "We free," she whispered to the ghosts. "All of us, we finally free." But freedom, Sally learned, came with its own struggles. The war ended slavery, but it didn't end racism, didn't end poverty, didn't heal the trauma of generations. The years after the war was hard in different ways. Reconstruction bringing hope and violence in equal measure, the rise of the Klan, the struggle to build lives from nothing. Sally spent her remaining years doing what she'd always done, helping her people survive. She opened a school for formerly enslaved children, teaching them to read and write, teaching them their history, making sure they knew the names of the ancestors who'd suffered and resisted. She taught them about Africa, about the Middle Passage, about the Underground Railroad. She taught them about 500 lashes and the woman who survived them. Moses became a teacher himself, working alongside his mama. Elijah went into politics, fighting for voting rights and equal treatment. Both men married, had children, gave Sally grandchildren who would never know chains, who would grow up free. Sally lived to be 73 years old, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1888, surrounded by family. Her funeral was attended by hundreds, people she'd led to freedom, their children and grandchildren, activists and educators, anyone who'd been touched by her story. They buried her in Philadelphia, in a cemetery for free blacks. On her headstone, they carved simple words: Sally, Queen of the Scars, she survived so we could live. But her legacy didn't end with death. Her story was told and retold, passed down through generations like the spirituals she'd sung, like the root work Aunt Hester had taught her, like the memories of Africa her mama had preserved. Every time someone stood up against injustice, every time someone refused to bow, every time someone chose freedom over safety, Sally's spirit was there. Her scars became symbols, not of victimhood but of survival, not of weakness but of strength. Proof that the human spirit, especially the black spirit forged in the fires of slavery and resistance, cannot be broken no matter what weapons are brought against it. Today, if you listen close on quiet nights in the South, folks say you can still hear her. Hear the spirituals she sang. Hear the chains she broke. Hear her voice telling the young ones to stand tall, to remember who they are, to never forget the price that was paid for freedom. The plantation houses crumbled. The masters died. The system of slavery was destroyed. But Sally's memory lives on, powerful, strong as ever, teaching us that resistance is possible, that liberation can be seized, that even in the darkest times, hope survives. Her story is our story. Her fight is our fight. Her victory is our inheritance. And so I say to you now, sitting here in the glow of this fading fire, remember Sally Duasoit. Remember the woman who took 500 lashes and stood back up. Remember the mother who crossed through hell to save her children. Remember the conductor who led hundreds to freedom. Remember the queen who wore her scars like a crown. The masters tried to write us out of history, tried to make us forget, tried to break our spirits and erase our names. But we remember. We carry the stories. We keep the flame alive. Sally suffered, yes, Lord. But she also survived. She resisted. She conquered. She loved fiercely and fought bravely, and lived fully despite every attempt to reduce her to property. And her legacy? Her legacy lives in every black person who stands tall today. who speaks truth to power, who refuses to accept injustice, lives in every freedom fighter, every activist, every person who says no more and means it. The old ones was right when they said Sally had the mark of a queen on her spirit. She proved it with every breath, every step, every act of defiance. So when you feel weak, remember Sally taking those lashes without breaking. When you feel scared, remember Sally strangling her oppressor with the chains meant to bind her. When you feel hopeless, remember Sally crossing rivers and dodging bullets to save her children. When you feel like giving up, remember that Sally never did. Her voice still echoes. Her spirit still marches. Her story still teaches. The whip fell silent long ago. The chains were melted down. The auction blocks were burned. But Sally's testimony remains clear and strong and true, ringing out across the years like a bell that cannot be silenced. Those who suffered, suffered. Those who resisted, left a legacy. And legacy we keep here in Echoes from the Quarters, from